Chapter 1542. Power of Metal. Royal Divine Monarch. A fair fist crashed into the inky black divine sword. Terrifying energy instantly shattered the space within a radius of 5 kilometers. After releasing her golden divine halo, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's power had increased explosively, and just a single punch was powerful enough to kill a Dao integration stage super mighty figure. However, Lin's evil-slaying sword was imbued with the unique power of laws, and it was able to inflict a gash on Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's fist. Lin was blasted flying, and he felt as if all of the bones in his body had been shattered. Even his evil-slaying sword almost flew out of his hand. One had to realize that he was currently in his triple buff state, which was more than enough to pummel a normal Dao integration stage super mighty figure. However, he was still unable to withstand Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's attack. Lin Yu also stumbled back a few steps and looked at the gash on her fist with a surprised expression. Your weapon is a little strange. I'm going to steal it for research. F***CK off. And Lin didn't even get a chance to attack before the evil-slaying sword sprang into action of its own accord. An inky black sword projection that threatened to engulf heaven and earth hurtled toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. A white divine halo suddenly appeared on Lin Yu's left wrist, and her aura soared explosively again. Whoosh! Her body disappeared on the spot. Wow! A sword spirit with a temper. I like it. A seductive chuckle sounded from the sky, and Lin raised his head to discover that Lin Yu had already appeared above his head. There was a blue divine halo revolving around her waist, and there were 2 purple divine halos exuding a seductive light on her ankles in a pair of gorgeous white crystal shoes. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had already activated her 5 divine halos. She looked down at Lin with a slight smile on her face. Behind her was a boundless crimson sky, and her eyes were a cold golden color. The purple divine light beneath her feet had already spread for over 50 kilometers. Purple gravitational stomp. Bam! And Lin could sense a boundless gravitational force crushing down upon him with unstoppable force. This was an indescribable power that affected every single part of his body. His bones, flesh, and blood all felt an indescribable sense of pressure. Without hesitation, Lin unleashed his evading turtle technique. Boom! The ground suddenly caved in like a ball of cotton being hammered flat. Lin's body landed heavily on ground. His turtle shell cracked and shattered like glass. The divine flames of the phoenix had already engulfed heaven and earth as they swept toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was still smiling, and the divine halo around her waist began to glow. An absolute shield imbued with the will of the heavens materialized to keep the phoenix's divine flame attack at bay. Now, she did not have the leisure to deal with Phoenix. The most urgent matter at hand was to kill Lin. Howl in agony and anguish. It would be perfect if you shed a few tears. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu laughed heartily. She really enjoyed this moment, but she didn't hold back in the slightest. She stomped down with all her might, and boundless gravitational force pressed down relentlessly upon the ground. At this moment, Heavenly God Jordan also activated one divine halo after another, just like Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. The golden divine ring represented power, the white divine ring represented speed, and the blue divine ring represented defense. He had already awakened his 3rd divine ring. The celestial arch, black spirit snake, and white spirit snake were all unleashing their full power to battle the heavenly gods to a standstill. The power unleashed by 3 mighty figures at the Dao integration pinnacle stage was not something that a normal cultivator could imagine. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they could crush the entire sky. Even the proud Heaven Pioneer stage great generals silently flew away to a place over 500 kilometers away in case they were killed by the shockwaves of the battle. Heavenly God, Jordan remained calm and collected in the face of the attacks from the 3 super mighty figures. There was not a single hint of panic on his face, and he didn't even display any signs of attacking. However, the more he did so, the more uneasy the celestial arch and the others became. They were like powerful beings who were constantly fighting 3 or 4 at a time. They didn't display any signs of attacking, but they were also extremely calm and collected, as if they had a trump card in their hands, and they were just waiting to unleash it upon their enemies. On another battlefield, the intense battle had already painted the entire sky into a rainbow of colors. If it weren't for the fact that they had cultivated the heaven-crushing techniques, even 5 return to Void Stage Mighty Figures combined would be unable to oppose a Heaven Pioneer Stage Great General. But now, 3 return to Void Stage Mighty Figures were able to keep a Heaven Pioneer Stage Great General at bay. This was a result of their teamwork, as well as their understanding of the true intent of the heaven-crushing techniques. Die. Great General Ling Ming, who was wearing a golden robe with divine symbols, let loose an almighty roar as he sliced Cassidy in half from the waist with his holy light sword, upon which an extremely sharp sword intent swept forth for tens of thousands of meters. For my lord, Cassidy's upper body didn't stop attacking, and it slashed its crimson immortal sword toward Great General Ling Ming, slicing off a chunk of his arm. I die with no regrets. Merlin charged toward Great General Ling Ming with black vein patterns all over his body, and a sinister, ghostly aura emanated from his body as his power of the divine Tao surged forth in a scorching and dark manner. Great General Ling Ming let loose a blood-curdling wail as he stumbled back in retreat, and his holy sword stabbed toward Merlin. The angle, timing, and power of this sword strike were all impeccable. However, Merlin didn't retreat at this moment. Instead, he ignored Great General Ling Ming's attack and cackled with glee as he grabbed toward Great General Ling Ming's heart. The holy light sword pierced through Merlin's chest and pulverized him. At the same time, Merlin also plunged his hand into Great General Ling Ming's chest and crushed his heart. He was trading a life for a life. Ha ha! You're the ones who are going to die. I've been blessed by the heavens, and even if I don't have a heart, I can still receive the power of the heavens and reform my heart. Great General Ling Ming chortled with glee. Is that so? A ghastly hole had appeared in Merlin's chest, but his smile remained unchanged. Great General Ling Ming was suddenly struck by a sense of peril, and he wanted to retreat. However, boundless ghostly aura suddenly surged from Merlin's hand, sealing away his power. Great General Ling Ming faltered for a split second. It was in this short period of time that a huge white dog tore through the air and appeared behind Great General Ling Ming. It opened its massive mouth and viciously bit down toward Great General Ling Ming's head. Great General Ling Ming saw the sky darken, and in its place was a row of sharp teeth. Then he felt an excruciating pain shoot through his neck, and he was plunged into boundless darkness. Heaven-crushing technique, heaven-swallowing dog. Woof. Dabai bit off Great General Ling Ming's head before swallowing it into his stomach. Hee, now that your head has been destroyed, do you think the heavens will reward you with a new head? A disdainful expression appeared on Merlin's face. Right at this moment, Cassidy reassembled her upper and lower body before charging toward Great General Ling Ming. She unleashed a sword projection that sliced Great General Ling Ming into over 10,000 pieces. Now that your body has been destroyed, do you think the heavens will reward you with a new life? Cassidy's expression was as cold as ice, and she sneered at the air. Dabai silently swallowed. As expected, these 2 lunatics were not to be trifled with. They were already dead, but they still didn't forget to sneer at the air. In less than a minute, a Heaven Pioneer Stage Great General had been slain. Cassidy, Merlin, and Dabai didn't stop to rest. They immediately rushed toward their other teammates. Chapter 1543. Great General Ling Ming. The other 8 heavenly human tribe Great Generals' expressions shifted upon hearing this. Never would they have thought that they would be the first mighty figures to fall. Even without the enhancements of their combination spell formations, Heaven Pioneer Stage Heavenly Human Tribe mighty figures were invincible below the Tao integration stage. However, They were now being slain by a few return to void stage mighty figures. Great General Shihua was hurling golden pebbles relentlessly, and they were like cannonballs hurtling toward the three handsome men and beautiful women in front of her with extremely fearsome might. If a mighty figure were to be struck by these golden rocks, they would be obliterated on the spot. However, Su Qianyun continued to evade the pebbles in this fearsome battle environment. She had brushed past death time and time again, but she was still able to maintain a level of composure that was far superior to that of a normal person. The moonlight disk drew out terrifying trajectories in the air, appearing and disappearing mysteriously, attacking the petrified marshal from all kinds of strange angles. In her battle state, Su Qianyun was never afraid. However, Great General Shihua was not an easy opponent to deal with. She was able to evade the moonlight disk with the most graceful movement techniques, and she was like a beautiful flower dancing in the wind. Boom! The air beside her suddenly exploded. An earth-shattering true intent imbued with destructive power erupted forth. Great General Shihua retreated in a disheveled manner. She was able to evade Su Qianyun's attacks with graceful movement techniques. But in the face of Xian Yuancheng's ridiculous explosions, she was enraged to the point of wanting to kill him. It was also as she was retreating that a spatial ripple suddenly appeared on one of the flying rocks. A tall and slender young woman leaped out from the rubble with the "Send you safely on your way" sword in her hand. She hurtled through the air toward the great general's chest, leaving a dazzling silvery white trail in her wake. This attack was like a bolt of lightning. It was imbued with killing intent as soon as it appeared. Great General Shihua harumphed coldly as she gripped the air in front of her, upon which the space around her warped and compressed to the extreme. A burst of boundless will of the heavens forcibly stopped the dagger in its tracks. Bam! Yi Ling was blasted flying, but she quickly disappeared between heaven and earth, and no one knew where she had hidden herself. At this time, Su Qianyun's attack arrived in front of Marshal Shihua. The three of them had been completely powerless against the heavenly human tribe great generals in the past, but now they were able to hold their own against Great General Shihua. This was all thanks to the heaven-crushing techniques that were able to suppress the heavenly human tribe great generals. This was also why almost all of the mighty figures of the Kingdom of the Nine States had joined the heaven-crushing sect. As long as they could obtain the power to oppose the heavenly human tribe and defend the Kingdom of the Nine States, they were willing to make this sacrifice. The situation of the battle was not as one-sided as the marshals had expected. Only now did they deeply understand how ignorant and arrogant they were when they said those words earlier. Destroying the enemy in 1 minute, killing the enemy, and then helping the kami. They hadn't even eliminated the enemy yet, but the enemy had already eliminated one of their generals. Marshal Wu Ma was thinking of quickly getting rid of the two weaklings in front of him before going to support his other teammates. His opponents seemed to be the easiest to bully. His enemies were the two return to Void Stage Sword Immortals of the 4-9 Immortal Sect, Sun Yuluo and Yao Mingxi. Slap! Great General Wu Ma slapped Yao Mingxi's flying sword aside before unleashing another punch, which sent Sun Yuluo flying with blood gushing from his mouth. He stepped forward and instantly appeared before Sun Yuluo like a streak of light. At the same time, white lightning revolved around his hand, and he was just about to press it down upon Sun Yuluo's head. It was quite clear that he had already made up his mind to insta-kill his opponent. Little Meng, Sun Yuluo yelled for help as the ancient sword in his hand glowed with a bright light. A blue child instantly appeared beside Wu Ma before wrapping his tongue around Sun Yuluo's neck. At the same time, a bone-chilling voice traveled into Wu Ma's ears. Your head fell off. Aren't you going to pick it up? Wu Ma instinctively felt like there really was a head beneath his feet as he listened to that eerie and terrifying voice. He turned to look at the ground, only to find that it was the little boy's head. In that instant, Great General Wu Ma's neck was struck by the ancient sword like a bolt of lightning, and it was as if his head really was going to be severed into the ground in that instant. The Blue Dream Sword Spirit was most proficient in this combination of intimidation and assassination. However, he had still underestimated Great General Wu Ma's strength. In the instant that the ancient sword fell, Great General Wu Ma suddenly came to his senses, and a tough golden shell suddenly materialized around his neck. The ancient sword struck the shell, upon which dazzling sparks erupted. Wu Ma grabbed onto the Blue Dream Sword Spirit's tongue and tore it off before launching a punch toward the Blue Dream Sword Spirit's head. Little Meng, Sun Yulua yelled as he retreated. In the end, the Blue Dream Sword Spirit was blasted apart by Great General Wu Ma's fist. At this moment, Yao Mingshi swung his sword again. A thick shell also materialized around Wu Ma's hand, and he caught the sword blade with his bare hands. Yao Mingshi's heart jolted. At this moment, Wu Ma's other arm was like a saber. It instantly severed the arm that was holding the sword. Ah! Yao Mingshi let loose a blood-curdling cry as he stumbled back in retreat. Sun Yulua charged forward again, only to be shattered by Wu Ma's fist, and he tumbled to the ground with blood gushing from his mouth. You're quite stubborn. Wu Ma glanced at the two of them and raised his fist. He was about to punch Wu Ma again and send him on his way. Right at this moment, a blood-red sword descended from the sky, and it was vast and boundlessly sharp. Great General Wu Ma's expression shifted drastically, and he immediately materialized a suit of armor to defend himself. This was the man who had slain Great General Ling Ming, so he had to take him seriously. Sun Yulua was on the verge of tears, as if he were grasping at straws. Cassidy, you're finally here to help us. There wasn't a single freak at the return to Void Pinnacle stage, and he and Yao Mingshi weren't like Xian Yuan Cheng or Yiling. He and Yao Mingshi were basically stalling the Heavenly Human Tribe Great General with their lives on the line. Thankfully, Cassidy had killed the Heavenly Human Tribe Great General and arrived in time to provide reinforcements. Otherwise, he and Yao Mingshi would be dead meat. Elsewhere, the battle was taking place. Xiao Hong was trembling uncontrollably as she hid within the sun she had created. Meanwhile, Great General Qi Nen was frantically smashing her sun barrier. This was the first time Xiao Hong had been so cowardly. This was the first time she was facing an opponent who was comparable to a rookie Dao integration stage super mighty figure, and she didn't dare to face him head-on. Soon, Dabai and Merlin arrived to provide reinforcements. Xiao Hong finally dared to push her son toward Great General Qi Nen. The Fifth Sage was still struggling to hold on. He was the #1 return to Void Stage Cultivator under Nuwa's command, so he was able to just barely hold on against a Heavenly Human Tribe Great General. As for Bai Ling, she was beating up a Heavenly Human Tribe Great General on her own like a child. Tina was even more powerful. She was chasing after 3 Heavenly Human Tribe Great Generals. Chapter 1544. Tina was naturally unable to take care of 3 Heavenly Human Tribe Great Generals at the same time. Even if her combat prowess allowed for it, she wouldn't be able to deal with 3 Heavenly Human Tribe Great Generals at the same time. Hence, she released the Frost Dress Woman, who she had just trained, as well as the 3 other mighty figures in the Divine Mirror World, to hold off the other 2 Heavenly Human Tribe Great Generals. Then, she grabbed one of the Great Generals and bullied him with all her might. She had no choice. All of the other powerful beings in the Divine Mirror World were fighting on the front lines of the Kingdom of the 9 States. As the goddess of creation, she had no choice but to take matters into her own hands. However, as soon as she did, the Heavenly Human Tribe Great General Xing Zhou was scared ***. One of Xing Zhou's arms was cleanly chopped off by Tina in the blink of an eye. He couldn't even keep up with Tina's movements. "Gary, come and help me." Xing Zhou knew very well that he was no match for this seemingly harmless little elf the moment they exchanged blows. He immediately shouted for help. Gary, who was currently fighting with the Frost Dress Woman, was the closest to the Star Continent. Upon hearing the call for help, he immediately rushed over to help. Thus, the battle became a battle between Great Marshals Xing Zhou and Gary and Tina and the Frost Dress Woman. Unfortunately, the 2 Great Marshals were once again crushed and forced into dire straits. Yutao, come and help us. Gary and Xing Zhou yelled in unison. Yutao had just defeated 3 return to void stage mighty figures from the divine mirror world, and she immediately joined the battle. How could Xing Zhou, Gary, and Yutao lose against Tina and the frost dress woman? Less than a minute later, the 3 great generals were being chased around by Tina and the frost dress woman again. They were astonished to discover that Tina was ridiculously powerful. If they were invincible below the Tao integration stage, then what about this return to void stage fairy who was chasing after them? Invincible below the Tao integration stage? She could go fight heavenly gods with that kind of power. Wasn't it obvious that he was bullying them by hanging out with them here? If the 3 great generals knew that Tina had injured heavenly goddess Linyu, they probably wouldn't be as astonished and incredulous as they were now. Even if they couldn't win, they would at least be more mentally prepared. The battle was still ongoing, but they were gradually unable to hold on. The frost dress woman was a bona fide mighty figure at the return to void pinnacle stage, and she floated around the 3 great generals like a ghost. Instead of hanging on to one tree, she would hang on to all 3 of them. Her spells were also unpredictable. Most of them were mind-affecting or binding spells, so they could be considered top-notch binding spells. The frost dress woman gave Tina a very good environment to deal damage in. Tina had transformed into a goddess of slaughter. She was clearly a petite and adorable little fairy, but none of the great generals dared to look down on her when she wielded her immortal sword. All of them shuddered involuntarily upon hearing her say, "Divine technique times. If it wasn't for the fact that they were hoping to stall for time and wait for the reinforcements from the other marshals, they would have fled for their lives long ago. Why would they still be struggling here? Do you like me?" A light voice drifted over. Xing Zhou felt a chill run down his spine. His body instantly felt like it was in extreme winter, and his movements began to slow down. F***CK off. Flames of rage burned in his eyes as he swung his arm behind him like a dragon. The frost dress woman chuckled softly as her clothes fluttered in the wind. Her body flew backward in the face of Great General Xing Zhou's attack. Right at the instant that Xing Zhou attacked, Tina's golden wings flapped, and specks of golden light appeared as her body disappeared on the spot. In the next instant, she had already appeared before Xing Zhou. Her heart lotus ice sword tore through the air like a flash of blue light as it stabbed toward his throat. Xing Zhou. Yutao wielded her pure, white holy spear and unleashed an explosive slash to parry Tina's attack. The shockwaves from the slash instantly tore a massive fissure that extended for over 10 kilometers into the ground. Yutao's all-out attack had finally saved Xing Zhou's life. However, it was also at this moment that she felt an indescribable chill on her cheeks. A pair of slender blue hands were caressing her cheeks from behind. A head was resting on her arm as a pursed lips chuckled. Big sister is so crude and violent. It'll be very unclassy. An extreme chill instantly enveloped her entire body. At this moment, even her thoughts had slowed down. Not only could the frost dress woman bind someone on a physical level, but she could also interfere with them on a mental level. The little fairy grasped this opportunity once again. Her blue immortal sword whooshed toward Yutao. In her current state, Yutao was completely unable to dodge this attack. Death surged through her entire body like a tidal wave. "Yutao!" Gary cried out in alarm. His fists were enveloped in holy light as he ferociously smashed them toward Tina's immortal sword, deflecting her attack. Gary's all-out attack had finally saved Yutao's life. At this moment, Gary, who had just made his move, felt a chill run down his spine. Big brother, your figure is so good." The frost dress woman's soft and seductive voice traveled over. She wrapped her arms around Gary's waist in a seductive manner. Tina grasped this opportunity and stabbed her sword toward Gary. A look of despair appeared on Gary's face. He felt like he was about to die. "Gary!" Xing Zhou let loose a cry of surprise as he kicked Tina's immortal sword away. Xing Zhou's all-out attack had finally saved Gary's life. Then, The frost dress woman suddenly floated behind Xingzhou. Xingzhou, Yu Tao, Gary, Xingzhou, the three great generals of the heavenly human tribe, took turns being chased by Tina. They had to save each other time and time again, and they were on the brink of death time and time again. They felt like this battle was far too thrilling. How could it be so terrifying? They were the three great generals of the heavenly human tribe. How could they be surrounded by a fairy? Did she have to be so stimulating? If you always stood by the river, your shoes would always get wet. If you always hovered on the brink of death, you would always have your limits. After a short while, Tina stabbed her heart lotus ice sword toward Gary again. Gary! Yu Tao hurriedly protected him. Her spear was like a dragon as it stabbed toward Tina. However, Tina had experienced so many assassination attempts and had definitely improved. She had actually held back a trick up her sleeve. The blade of her sword was tilted like an antelope's horn, and its sword intent was ethereal and unfathomable. Divine technique, heaven-severing sword flash. The blade of her sword was pointed toward Yu Tao. It was as if everything had become natural in a fixed pattern. Thus, Yu Tao never would have imagined that Tina would turn her spear toward her at this critical moment. Tina's petite body dodged Yu Tao's spear. Her sword flashed extremely quickly, and the true intent of heaven-severing sword flash suppressed the power bestowed upon her by the heavens. The blade of Tina's sword grew larger and larger in Yu Tao's eyes. Eventually, it took up her entire field of vision. The heart lotus ice sword pierced through Yu Tao's head at lightning speed, and its cold power destroyed her vitality. Yu Tao! Yu Tao! Xingzhou and Gary yelled at the same time. A boundless chill started to rise in their hearts. They suddenly realized that with Yu Tao's death, their situation had gone from hell to certain death. Chapter 1545. Xingzhou and Gary felt like they were about to die. They wanted to call for help from their companions, only to discover that all of their companions were also engaged in arduous battles. They could only pin their hopes on the two heavenly gods. It had to be said that the power of divine heaven stage powerhouses was indeed terrifying. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu and Heavenly God Jordan were more than enough to take on 5 Dao integration stage super mighty figures. In particular, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was completely invincible as she disregarded the Phoenix's attacks and stomped down on Enlin with her white crystal shoes, as if she were a paramount goddess stomping down on an ant. The ground within a radius of hundreds of thousands of meters caved in from her stomp. The Phoenix didn't think that Enlin would be beaten to the ground so quickly, and it finally unleashed its trump card. Its gargantuan wings abruptly spread open, and divine flames surged for over 50 kilometers, incinerating the heavens. A golden spell formation appeared in front of the Phoenix, from which an ancient and boundless aura emanated. Flaming feathers rained down from the sky. The Phoenix's prideful divine Tao and heaven-crushing true intent fused perfectly in that instant before exploding forth with a resounding boom. Golden divine flames erupted like pillars of light, hanging in the crimson heavens like a golden rainbow. Extremely high temperatures instantly incinerated the surrounding space. Wheel of life and death, heaven-crushing nirvana flames. Little Huang was a mythological beast that had died once, and after its reincarnation, it was able to better understand what death was and what the cycle between life and death was. When the Phoenix's heaven-crushing intent and nirvana intent fused together, there was a hint of vitality imbued within the destruction, as if it was incomplete. However, it was exactly this hint of vitality that made the will of the heavenly Tao resist Little Huang's attack less violently, thereby weakening the power of the heavens. The heaven-crushing nirvana flames crashed down upon heavenly goddess Lin Yu's blue barrier, and it was completely kept at bay by the barrier. However, a burst of heaven-crushing intent soon tore at the barrier with unstoppable force. At the same time, there was a burst of vitality imbued within the destruction that was constantly tearing at the barrier in an attempt to discover its G-spot. The barrier that was imbued with the will of the heavens and could keep all powers at bay suddenly began to show signs of being overwhelmed. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was initially not paying much heed to the Phoenix's attack, but her eyes abruptly widened at this moment, and she immediately withdrew her gravity stomp before dodging to the side. The blue barrier began to distort and then melt. Rumble. Divine flames swept toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. BZ. The white divine halo on his left wrist began to spin madly. Even though Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had already raised her speed to the extreme, she was still unable to completely evade the Phoenix's heaven-crushing nirvana flames. The flames burned all the way from her side, tearing her white dress and burning her slender, jade-like arms red and even charred. In the end, a wisp of hidden power instantly stripped all of the vitality from Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's arm, reducing it to the tiniest inky black particles. Phoenix was disappointed to see this. It thought that it would be able to burn the other party to death in one go, but it didn't expect that it would only burn off an arm. This was a huge loss. One had to know that this attack was its strongest move against the heavens. This was the perfect opportunity for Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu to ignore its spell techniques and focus on Enlin. It thought that it had grasped the perfect timing. It could only blame Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's freakish reflexes and speed. The Phoenix was very disappointed, but Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was extremely shocked and enraged. My defenses have been broken? How is it that one or two of you can break through my defense? That's impossible. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu hurriedly retreated with incredulity etched on her face as she stared intently at the Phoenix. The Phoenix raised its proud head and looked up at Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu with a disdainful expression. In its eyes, there was no one it couldn't mess with aside from Xiaolan, even heavenly gods. Time flew by, and 1 minute passed by in the blink of an eye. Lin Yu took a deep breath. The threat she had made had failed to materialize once again. She had been struck by 2 incredible attacks in a row, and her face had become a little red and swollen. A green divine halo imbued with boundless vitality appeared on her back. Life of Green. Lin Yu raised her head and spoke in an indifferent voice. Her 6th divine halo appeared, and boundless vitality began to flow into her body. Her arm had clearly been incinerated by the Phoenix, but countless cells were rapidly growing and regenerating at a rate discernible to the naked eye. When the Phoenix saw this scene, it couldn't accept it. This was equivalent to erasing all the credit for releasing the King Bomb. It immediately blasted forth a torrential divine flame waterfall imbued with the power of fire as it hurtled toward the heavenly god nearby. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was just about to unleash a movement technique to evade. All of a sudden, golden lightning tore through the air, illuminating heaven and earth with a pure golden light. A man in a golden void lightning battle robe appeared at an extremely terrifying speed to seal off her path of retreat. Lin, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's expression shifted once again, and she immediately ignored the Phoenix's attack as she focused all of her attention on Lin. She turned around and unleashed a punch with the power of metal. Lin appeared like a bolt of lightning, and his fist was enshrouded in the power of lightning as it crashed down upon Lin Yu. Boom! The 2 fists collided. Heaven and earth instantly fell silent. Explosive lightning instantly pulverized the space within a radius of over 50 kilometers. Just the shockwaves from the collision of the 2 fists were enough to shatter the Phoenix's divine flame attack. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's left arm had already been enshrouded by the power of metal, and the paramount power and will of the heavenly Tao had been injected into her fist. The will of the heavens was the paramount law of this world. If the heavens said that her fist could destroy everything, then it definitely could. However, the power of the heavens was no longer absolute. This was because the man standing before her also possessed a similar absolute power. In fact, the golden lightning divine halo above his head was even purer than her divine halo. It was as if 2 heavens were fighting. One of them said, "I'm the most bad *SS. I can destroy everything with a single punch." The other said, "I'm the most bad *SS. I can destroy everything with a single punch." Both of them were the absolute wills of the heavens, and a conflict had erupted between them. The one who wielded the paramount power of the heavenly gods was gradually gaining the upper hand. The power of the heavenly gods was the absolute law. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu was astonished to discover that a burst of paramount lightning had already torn through her power of metal and pulverized her fist. She activated the power of all 6 divine halos almost instinctively and injected them into her fist at the same time. Boom, boom, boom. Power imbued with absolute will stacked on top of one another before crashing down with mountain-toppling force. If one, I'm the most bad *SS, well won't do, then what if I say 6 times? You only have 1 divine halo, and you only have a 40-60 chance of winning against me. If I amplify my will by 6 times, what are you going to do? Chapter 1546. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was going all out this time. With each divine halo that she obtained, her basic attributes would increase explosively. However, the core power of each divine halo had its own function. This was a natural law. When she forcibly combined the powers of all of the divine halos to form the same type of intent, she would receive unparalleled power, but she would also suffer extremely terrifying backlash from the heavenly Tao. Lin Yu didn't really care. She was going to suffer backlash from the heavenly Tao anyway, so what if there was more backlash? As long as she could kill this man who refused to be her friend as quickly as possible, everything would be worth it. Die. Boundless golden light burst forth from Lin Yu's fist with the power of her 6 divine halos, and it completely suppressed in Lin's golden void lightning before pushing it forward. And Lin could feel the power surging through his fist at an insane rate. Bursts of power stacked on top of one another, and it was as if the entire heavens were crashing down upon him from the 1st level to the 6th level. The invincible golden void lightning was being suppressed by the 6th level intent of the heavenly Tao, and a searing pain erupted from his fist before spreading throughout his entire body. The power surged through his body and straight into his consciousness, as if it were trying to destroy his entire being. Bam! The power completely exploded, and Lin was blasted flying for tens of thousands of meters, and he only managed to avoid being obliterated by the power of his body of the war god. However, even though he had managed to hold on, his bodily functions were already on the brink of shattering. He's not dead yet. Astonishment and confusion appeared in Lin Yu's eyes again. She wasn't a person who liked to waste her breath, and she immediately stepped into the air before charging toward Lin at an even more terrifying speed, upon which she launched another punch toward Lin. If 1 punch couldn't kill him, then 2 punches. And Lin was most afraid of enemies like this who didn't speak much. They didn't give him any time to catch his breath or bluff his way through. The golden lightning divine halo instantly transformed into a white divine halo of flowing wind, and its aura also became ethereal and unfathomable. Wind, he spoke in an indifferent voice. A gentle, white divine light erupted from the divine halo before merging into heaven and earth. Under the illumination of the divine light, and Lin's body became more and more illusory, and even the essence of his life began to change. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu unleashed a punch that was imbued with the power of her 6 divine halos toward Lin. The power of metal, speed, defense, and life force combined together to unleash a devastating attack, instantly shattering a large chunk of the heavens and raising a mountain range over 500 kilometers away to the ground. And Lin's body was also pulverized into nothingness by this punch. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu slowly withdrew her fist and was just about to heave a sigh of relief when she suddenly felt like something was amiss. This was her instinctive intuition as a heavenly god. That's not right. What I hit isn't a living being. There's no feeling of an expert dying, she frowned slightly. Could it be that I hit the air with all my strength? To be able to use an escape technique right under her nose without anyone noticing just how terrifying was his strength. The power of wind? To be able to fool even me, it must be this ability. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu looked around at the empty space around her and harumphed coldly. An orange divine halo suddenly appeared around her slender neck, upon which a peculiar power proliferated through the air and enshrouded heaven and earth. Everything in the world became incomparably real in her eyes. Nothing could hide from her perception and probing. Everything was displayed in its most realistic form in her eyes. Seventh divine halo, eternal reality. She looked around, and a vibrant yet playful smile suddenly appeared on her flawless features. Found you. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu glowered at a certain spot in the air. All transformations would be restored to their most fundamental state under the power of her seventh divine halo. Space tremored as divine power surged. A figure was forced to appear between heaven and earth again. At this moment, he was pouring immortal pills into his mouth, 6 of them at once. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. This was the first time Lin Yu had seen an enemy gulping down pills in such a frenzied manner. The power of 6 immortal pills was already the upper limit of what Lin's body could handle. Any more than that, and he wouldn't be able to digest it. The 6 immortal pills, combined with the power of the evergreen technique, could allow Lin to recover from his injuries at an extremely fast rate, thereby allowing him to fight for a longer period of time. An awkward smile appeared on Lin's face at the sight of Lin Yu's flabbergasted expression. Lin Yu, should we take a break? Boom! A terrifying aura surged violently. Lin Yu appeared before Lin in the blink of an eye, and her fist, which was imbued with the power of her 7th divine halo, crashed down upon Lin's body at the same time. This attack was even more terrifying than the one Lin had endured before. However, Lin had his reasons for choosing to use the power of wind against Lin. This time, Lin Yu's fist landed on Lin's body, but it was kept at bay by the gust of wind around his body. Wind could be as violent as a hurricane, but it could also be as gentle as a spring breeze. It was a combination of strength and gentleness. When the unstoppable fist struck the wind, it could break through the power of wind in an extremely violent manner. But at the same time, the wind could also push Lin back and retreat. The fist passed through the wind, but it also imbued the wind with a burst of power. This power pushed Lin back and retreat, thereby giving Lin enough time to face the fist, which had been weakened by the power of wind. That's right, Lin had never planned to face this attack head-on. Instead, he was planning to use his enemy's power to help him evade her attack. Thanks to his divine inspection technique and his heavenly wind power, he was finally able to just barely keep up with Lin Yu's punches, which had been hampered by the ball of wind. He stepped into the air, and his body shifted to the side. The power of Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's fist brushed past his shoulder before pulverizing the space behind him. And Lin could also sense that death had brushed past him in that instant. Battling with such an existence was extremely frightening. They didn't know what kind of power they would face in the next second, and the slightest carelessness would result in the destruction of both body and soul. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was a little surprised. She clearly didn't expect Lin to have evaded her attack, even with her 7 divine halos activated. This was even more frustrating than Lin blocking her fist. Die. Lin Yu's movement technique flashed through the air again and again, and her fists roared with the might of the heavens. And Lin used his heavenly wind power to materialize a cushioning barrier around his body to evade Lin Yu's attacks again and again. Even though he was in a perilous situation, he was still able to survive. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu wanted to kill him with all her might. Meanwhile, he was evading her attacks with all his might. It wasn't that he wasn't resisting, it was just that Lin had his own plans. The more he used the power of his divine halos, the more powerful the backlash of the heavenly Tao would be. Lin had already experienced this during this battle. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was becoming more and more powerful, but at the same time, her body was already being overworked, and there was bound to be a moment where it would collapse. Furthermore, the black, decaying area on her wrist had already spread to half her forearm. Even her green divine halo was unable to heal this kind of injury. At this moment, Lin realized that he could wear down Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu to death. Chapter 1547. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had initially held the upper hand, But due to Lin's unleashing of the power of the wind, lightning, heavenly gods, the situation had taken a drastic turn for the worse. On the contrary, Heavenly God Jordan's battle had finally taken a drastic turn. Heavenly God Jordan had been fighting steadily this entire time, and he finally unleashed a torrential barrage of attacks. Each and every one of his attacks was capable of shattering heaven and earth. It turned out that he had been conserving his strength and accumulating it all this time. Only now did he truly unleash it. Heavenly God Jordan's divine halo was of the same type as Linyu's, but it was used in a different way. Linyu was mostly violent and direct, while Jordan was unpredictable and ever-changing. A white-haired man stood proudly on the ground. 6 divine rings surrounded his hands, feet, waist, and back. Divine light surged, making him look extremely gorgeous and noble. The celestial arch threw out one imperial seal after another, each of which contained an earth-shattering divine might. Black Spirit Snake was the most violent of them all. She raised her golden sword high into the air, and a heaven-crushing sword intent pierced through the clouds for over 150 kilometers before slashing down upon the heavenly god. White Spirit Snake had mastered yin and yang, and each of her sword strikes was lethal. In the face of the combined attacks of 3 super mighty figures at the Tao integration pinnacle stage, Heavenly God Jordan no longer chose to play it safe. Instead, he unleashed his power to the extreme, and his divine might was powerful enough to shake the heavens. Golden Blade Manifestation. He spread his arms, and the divine ring on his wrist shone as bright as the sun. Countless golden swords appeared around him, cutting and spreading in all directions like a storm. Not only was the power of the golden blade shocking, but it also had the power to cut through everything in its sharpness. The celestial Thearka's divine symbols were pulverized by the golden light. Black Spirit Snake's massive sword was sliced in half, and White Spirit Snake's yin and yang dual swords were in a perilous situation due to the sheer number of golden blades. Just a single strike had vanquished the attacks of 3 Tao integration stage super mighty figures. Jordan didn't stop there. Almost at the exact same moment, the purple divine halo around his feet lit up with a bewitching light, and he raised a foot before kicking it into the sky. This movement was like a professional dancer standing in a split. A dignified heavenly deity making this kind of action could not help but be a little strange. However, a purple sphere shot out from his foot and flew into the sky. The sphere was not big, only the size of a human head. However, when the ball began to glow with purple light, the celestial arch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake were all struck by an omnipresent gravitational force, as if it were the origin of the world, and everything in this world had to draw closer to it. Heavenly gravitational attraction. Rumble, a power so strong that it was hard to resist, suddenly acted on the 3 of them. Their bodies involuntarily flew towards the purple ball, unable to resist at all. It was as if the rules of the world were as it should be, and everything was right and proper. Jordan's expression remained unchanged, and the white divine ring on his left wrist suddenly released a burst of energy that enveloped his entire body, upon which he disappeared on the spot. All of the combatants knew that Heavenly God Jordan hadn't disappeared. Instead, his speed had reached an unimaginable level. In the next instant, he appeared before Black Spirit Snake, and his 2 fingers stabbed toward Black Spirit Snake's heart like a bolt of lightning. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was using the power of her speed divine halo to evade the attacks. As for Heavenly God Jordan, he was using his speed divine halo to attack. This was the most direct and purest form of attack. Extremely high speed resulted in extremely high kinetic energy. He could unleash the power of a single type of divine halo in an extremely precise manner, thereby allowing him to achieve miraculous results. Of course, the prerequisite for this was that one of his divine halos had a suppressive effect on his enemies. If he were up against a pure heavenly god like Lin, then this technique would not work. Black Spirit Snake was already being restricted by the power of the heavenly gravitational attraction, and she was forced to fly toward the purple ball. Now that Heavenly God Jordan was attacking her at an extremely high speed, there was no way she could evade his attack, and she could only just barely hold her massive sword in front of her. Thankfully, the blade of the sword was quite wide, so it was like a shield, thereby reducing the margin for error. In this dire situation, she finally managed to place her divine tool in front of Heavenly God Jordan's fingers. Heavenly God's spear. Jordan's fingers stabbed forth mercilessly, and the massive divine tool sword let loose a sharp screeching sound as a terrifying power passed through the sword and directly struck Black Spirit Snake's body. PFFF. Black Spirit Snake felt as if she had been struck by a sledgehammer, and she hurtled back in retreat with blood gushing from her mouth. Big Sister. White Spirit Snake let loose a cry of surprise, and she immediately waved her Een-type divine sword to freeze the space around Heavenly God Jordan in an attempt to restrict his movements. At the same time, her Yang-type divine sword slashed through heaven and earth with the power of extreme Yang. A faint smile appeared on Heavenly God Jordan's face, and the divine halo around his waist glowed with a scintillating light, instantly materializing a blue shield. Bam! White Spirit Snake's sword projection fell upon the shield, but it was as if it had struck the hardest material in the world. It was unable to penetrate any further, and it could only continue to unleash its power on the outside. Heavenly God Jordan stepped lightly onto the ground, and the power of his heavenly gravitational attraction suddenly increased explosively again. White Spirit Snake let loose a light cry, and her petite body squirmed and struggled, but her body was still involuntarily drawn toward the purple ball. In the blink of an eye, Jordan had already appeared before White Spirit Snake, and a cold smile appeared on his face as he prepared to unleash an almighty fist. Bam! The purple ball suddenly exploded. The celestial arch was still in his attacking stance, and an imperial seal flashed over his palm as a determined expression appeared on his face. Heavenly God Jordan faltered slightly upon seeing this. In the instant that White Spirit Snake regained her freedom, she quickly slashed her Een and Yang swords toward 13 of Heavenly God Jordan's openings. Heavenly God Jordan's fist was evaded by White Spirit Snake's extremely agile and slender waist, and at the same time, her Een and Yang swords fell mercilessly. White Spirit Snake took advantage of this opportunity to retaliate, and she instantly unleashed the true intent of her Een and Yang sword Dao. Een and Yang revolved, and all things were born and destroyed as a divine tool. Domain erupted forth. At that moment, Heavenly God Jordan was dragged into a unique world that was composed of only black and white colors, and a boundless sword strike swept forth, each and every one of which seemed to be capable of parting heaven and earth. In the face of White Spirit Snake's torrential retaliation, Heavenly God Jordan's expression remained calm, and he hurriedly defended himself, but a series of wounds of different depths were inflicted upon his body. 3 seconds later, a 7th orange divine halo appeared around his neck, and the battle took another drastic turn. White Spirit Snake's frenzied attacks were unable to wound Heavenly God Jordan. Instead, Heavenly God Jordan took advantage of an opening, and his fingers punctured her chest like spears as crimson blood splattered through the air. The divine tool domain had been broken. White Spirit Snake threw up a mouthful of blood as she hurtled back in retreat. Jordan was just about to give chase. The celestial arch descended from the sky, and his golden imperial seal enshrouded the heavens as it crashed down with boundless divine might. Bam! Heavenly God Jordan was crushed into the ground by the gargantuan imperial seal. Chapter 1548. The celestial arch possessed a power similar to Heavenly God Jordan's, and he could also borrow the power of the heavens to attack his opponents. In fact, he was even more powerful than Heavenly God Jordan when it came to manipulating the heavens. Heavenly Realm Suppression. The celestial arch roared as the golden imperial seal in his hand lit up the heavens. Not only was it extremely powerful, but it was also imbued with the absolute sealing power bestowed upon it by the heavenly Tao. The golden imperial seal was like a five-fingered divine mountain, and the golden energy radiating from it was imbued with boundless weight, sealing away all powers, including the power of the heavens descending from the sky. Thus, it was able to suppress the white-haired man down below. Even the most powerful heavenly gods of the heavenly human tribe had to bow their heads to the celestial arch. Heavenly God, Jordan was pressed into the ground, but there was still no hint of rage on his face. His personality was very different from Linyu's. Linyu was quite violent, while he was more composed. Even though he was being crushed into the ground by the celestial Thearka's heavenly realm, he didn't do anything out of line. All he did was activate his eighth divine halo. A red divine halo appeared over heavenly God Jordan's heart. In contrast to the other divine halos, this red divine halo was completely stationary. The other 7 divine rings were constantly revolving. Only the red divine ring was frozen where his heart was. It was completely motionless, as if it had been jammed. It was extremely out of place. If it weren't for the fact that this stationary divine halo was still exuding a divine light, the celestial arch would be wondering if this was a fake divine halo. Heavenly God Jordan lay on the ground with the imperial seal crushing his body, and the sound of bones cracking could already be heard. However, his golden eyes narrowed slightly, as if there was a hint of a smile hidden within them. He gripped his hand, and the power of his golden divine halo converged into a sharp golden light that appeared over his palm. "You can still use your power?" The celestial Thearka's expression shifted slightly, and he immediately increased the intensity of his suppression. Even if you can use your power, you won't be able to do anything to me." Heavenly God Jordan was still smiling, and he held the wisp of golden light in his hand before gently sweeping it across the imperial seal. The celestial arch felt a stinging pain shoot through his palm, as if he had been sliced open. For some reason, the celestial arch suddenly had a bad feeling. However, before he had a chance to react, Heavenly God Jordan viciously stabbed that golden streak of light into his own heart. White blood gushed forth, staining the red divine halo on his chest white. The celestial arch was stunned. What did that mean? Did he commit suicide because he knew he had no chance of winning? If his enemies were trash like soul-piercing stage generals, he might actually believe him. But now, his opponent was in existence at the peak of the Celestial clan. How could he commit suicide? This matter was definitely not that simple. It was also at this moment that the Celestial Arch discovered that Heavenly God Jordan was still maintaining his gentle smile, and his voice was tinged with a hint of coldness. "My life is already connected to yours. What are you going to do if I stab my own heart? What nonsense are you spouting?" The celestial Thearka's expression darkened. Actually, he recalled the piercing pain that came from his palm when he used the heavenly Dipper realm. Could it be? At this moment, the divine halo around Heavenly God Jordan's chest suddenly began to revolve. The blood-red divine light was like a shining star. Sometimes it was extremely bright, and sometimes it was extremely dim. Plop! The celestial Thearka's heart skipped a beat. Immediately afterward, he was struck by a piercing pain in his heart. His heart, which was beating at an abnormal rate, began to crack open from the inside out. In the end, a gaping wound appeared on his skin, from which blood gushed forth. PFFF. The celestial arch threw up a mouthful of blood, and he stared at Heavenly God Jordan with astonishment etched on his face. He almost couldn't even maintain his imperial seal, and he could feel his vitality quickly flowing away from his body. Are you very surprised? Are you very confused? A hint of mockery appeared on Heavenly God Jordan's face for the first time. "You've only been sealed. Do you really think I can't kill you? This is the power of karma." The celestial arch stared at Heavenly God Jordan with a grave expression. "This is the power of karma, right?" Heavenly God Jordan turned to the celestial arch with a hint of surprise on his face. "I've been discovered. There's no harm in telling you. My eighth divine halo is a curse of karma. Once I establish a connection with it, I'll be able to do whatever I want to you. the golden blade projection in Jordan's hand sliced into his own heart, upon which pure white blood gushed forth. The celestial arch let loose a muffled groan, and he felt as if his heart was being pulverized as well. His golden and white imperial robe was instantly stained red, and agony surged through his body like a tidal wave as his vitality quickly crumbled. Disaster sharing is the most powerful and direct technique of the curse of karma. I can inflict harm upon my own life force to contact you and inflict harm upon you as well. Heavenly God, Jordan chuckled as he sliced off his own arm after pulverizing his own heart. At this moment, the celestial Thearcha's arm was also struck by some kind of mystical power, upon which a clean and smooth incision suddenly appeared on his shoulder. Blood gushed forth, and his arm was completely severed. A single flap of a butterfly's wings could whip up devastating gale-force winds from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. This was the butterfly effect, and it was the result of countless karma stacking on top of one another. However, the divine halo of the curse of karma could forcibly establish a karmic connection between two completely unrelated life forms through the use of a supreme curse. Everything that one party did would have a 100% effect on the other party, and the more powerful one was, the more powerful this effect would be. Disaster sharing was a direct connection between both parties, so the feedback was the most severe, and it was also the easiest to break through the enemy's defenses. This technique could transform because I hit you, so you'll be injured into because I hit myself, so you'll be injured. On the battlefield, the celestial Thearcha's arm was severed, and his celestial arch seal also crumbled at this moment. The heavenly Dipper realm was destroyed, and heavenly God Jordan regained his freedom with a victorious smile on his face. He stood up, and the green divine halo behind him began to glow with a scintillating light. Terrifying regenerative power surged through his entire body, reconnecting his severed arm while quickly healing his shattered heart. A faint smile appeared on heavenly God Jordan's face. We're both going to suffer the same amount of damage, but I won't die in the end. You'll be the one to die. If it weren't for the fact that the celestial arch was so powerful, he wouldn't have resorted to such a self-mutilation method. Heavenly God, Jordan raised his golden blade high into the air. This time, the blade's power had been completely unleashed. Not only had its physical damage increased to the maximum, but even its mental damage had also become extremely terrifying. If the celestial arch were to accept this attack without putting up any resistance, then he would definitely be killed. The smile on heavenly God Jordan's face remained unchanged as he stabbed his golden blade directly toward the celestial Thearcha's head. Now, it's time for the celestial arch to die. Chapter 1549. Heavenly God Jordan had already sentenced the celestial arch to death. At this moment, Black Spirit Snake had already sprung into action, and she flew toward heavenly God Jordan at an extremely fast speed. She appeared before heavenly God Jordan almost instantly, and a boundless golden light burst forth from her realm creation, evil, vanquishing sword as it fell upon the white-haired man. Hee, you trying to interrupt me? How naive. Heavenly God Jordan's smile remained unchanged as the blue divine halo around his waist created a barrier that could keep all powers at bay. Black Spirit Snake's sword was unable to break through Jordan's defenses in a short time. Just as heavenly God Jordan was confident in his victory, a figure in a white robe flew toward the celestial arch at an even faster speed. Celestial arch, let me help you. White Spirit Snake wielded her yin and yang dual swords and flew as fast as lightning. Heavenly God Jordan still wore a cold smile on his face. Everything they did now was futile. The golden blade projection was about to pierce through his head and consciousness. The celestial arch had no other choice but to pin his hopes on White Spirit Snake. He stared at the woman flying toward him as she thrust her sword toward him. Wait, he's going to deliver a sword strike. The celestial arch faltered momentarily, and White Spirit Snake had already severed his other arm. Blood splattered across the sky. The single-armed Heavenly Emperor became a Heavenly Emperor without arms. The scene was very tragic. The air suddenly became quiet. The celestial arch, Black Spirit Snake, and heavenly god Jordan all stared at the beautiful woman with astonishment on their faces. The woman grinned and sheathed her sword. Done. Done? Settle what? The celestial arch was completely dumbfounded. Could it be that white spirit snake decided to kill me first in order to prevent me from being killed by the enemy? This way, they would be able to successfully stop the evil plan of the enemy. This was indeed a very good way to deal with it. F***CKU. What a lunatic. Moreover, if she wanted to kill me, why didn't she chop off my head? Why did she chop off my arms? At this moment, heavenly god Jordan had already stabbed his golden blade into his own head, upon which blood and brain matter gushed forth. His screams finally resounded through the clouds. This strike was not only the end on the physical level, but also the end on the spiritual level. It's over. If I lose control, all of the living beings here are going to die. The celestial thearch's face was deathly pale. 10 seconds later, heavenly god Jordan was still wailing with anguish. But the sky sovereign was safe and sound. Black Spirit Snake turned toward the celestial arch with a hint of surprise on her face. The celestial arch turned to White Spirit Snake with excitement in his eyes. What's going on? According to the karmic feedback, the celestial arch had long since passed the time limit, but he was still completely unharmed. White Spirit Snake smiled. When you used the celestial arch seal, heavenly god Jordan forcibly established a connection with you through your spell technique. He planted the karma origin in your right hand, so I cut off his karma origin. Naturally, everything will be fine. The celestial arch finally saw the light. The reasoning behind it was simple. However, being able to see the source of karma and accurately sever it was extremely difficult. He couldn't help but take another look at the woman with a sweet smile in front of him. The celestial arch still remembered that White Spirit Snake had personally severed heavenly goddess Lin Yu's connection with the heavenly Tao during their battle. This woman was quite a force to be reckoned with. The screams were still echoing. Heavenly god Jordan was currently in an extremely awkward situation. He stabbed himself so hard that he was half dead, but the Sky Emperor was completely fine. He was about to throw up blood. What kind of sin had he committed for something like this to happen? He shouldn't have come up with such an idiotic strategy. No wonder White Spirit Snake didn't help the celestial arch establish the connection. She was waiting for this moment. The green divine halo was unleashing healing techniques in a frenzy to heal heavenly god Jordan's injuries. Peculiar smiles appeared on the faces of the celestial arch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake at the same time. Celestial arch finger, heaven-shattering sword, in Yang Sword Lightning. The three super mighty figures of the Tao integration pinnacle stage unleashed their most powerful spell techniques at the same time, which crashed into heavenly god Jordan's blue barrier. Terrifying energy surged forth, plowing through the ground within a radius of several hundred kilometers. A small hill was also very innocently flattened. Ow! A black-haired girl in a colorful puffy skirt, revealing her fair and well-proportioned legs, was forced to take a few steps back by the energy impact. Then, she forcibly stopped herself. Her crimson high heels with little wings on them had sunk deep into the ground, and her petite body was slightly hunched over, as if she were trying to obstruct her vision. Her large, lively eyes were fixed on the battle taking place up ahead, and she appeared to be very eager. She had already received a lot of pleasant surprises. She had witnessed the heavenly human tribe, divine heaven stage in action, and experienced the power of the will of the heavens. She had witnessed so many return to void stage mighty figures with limitless potential in battle. She had witnessed the celestial arch and the others unleash extremely powerful spell techniques. Most importantly, she was greeted by the sight of Lin who had been resurrected. This was simply a huge surprise. If it weren't for the fact that they were on different sides, she would be tempted to give him a hug. However, she refrained from doing so. If she were to step forward now, she would be dragging the Southern Heavenly Wing Nation down with her. The Southern Heavenly Wing Nation had always stood aloof from worldly affairs, and she couldn't allow it to be destroyed just because of her stance. This was her responsibility as she was the nine-color divine vermilion bird of the southern heavenly wing nation. And Lin, you're already so powerful. A hint of a blush appeared on the vermilion bird princess features, and she was a little nervous as she prayed in a quiet voice. If you're this powerful, we'll be able to unleash all of our powers in the future. So please don't die. On the heavenly human tribe, great general battlefield. 5 minutes had finally passed. Bai Ling's formation disruptor had completely run out of energy. All of the Heaven Pioneer stage great generals could now use their three-man combination spell formation again, and each three-man team could unleash power comparable to that of a veteran Dao integration stage super mighty figure. Get into formation. Great General Mia yelled. "Oh, come here." Xing Zhou wailed with anguish. "Ah, save me." Great General Wu Ma yelled for help. Get into formation. Pwah. Great General Shi Hua's chest was punctured by Xian Yuan Cheng. "Oh, it's over." Great General Zhua, he was in despair. Only now did Mia discover that they had no chance of getting into formation. All of the great generals had already fallen into a quagmire, and the only fate awaiting them was death. Of the 9 heavenly human tribe great generals, only 5 remained, and they had been split up in different locations, so there was no way they could turn the tables. Never would the high and mighty great generals have thought that they would suffer such a crushing defeat, and their opponents were a bunch of return to void stage mighty figures. Great General Xing Zhou let loose a blood-curdling wail as he was sliced in half by Tina. At this point, Xing Zhou, Gary, and Yu Tao, the 3 great marshals who were fighting against Little Fairy, had all fallen. Chapter 1550. Explosions were erupting incessantly somewhere on the ground. A series of sharp, murderous flowers were blooming in the air above. There were 3 cultivators riddled with wounds, and they were attacking Great General Shi Hua at the center. Marshal Shi Hua's golden robe had already become tattered, and it was no different from a beggar's robe. Her fair and tender skin would appear and disappear under the rags from time to time, giving her a seductive beauty that was in dire straits. If it weren't for the fact that she had been driven to the brink of insanity during the battle, which ruined her overall beauty, she really would have been quite a pitiful sight. Frosty Moon, Myriad Flower Wheel. Su Qianyan tapped her foot lightly into the air, and she evaded Great General Shi Hua's golden rock attacks with extreme agility. She then pressed a hand down toward Shi Hua, who was over a kilometer away. In the sky above, there were 3,000 moonlight discs, and their bright blue light eclipsed the crimson color of the sky. They covered the entire sky, and they rotated at high speed, slicing through the air before crashing down with extremely sharp, killing intent that almost froze the surrounding space. Frosty Moon, 100-flower slaughter. This power is even more powerful than before. Great General Shi Hua looked up into the sky with astonishment on her face. Was she concealing her power? No. Great General Shi Hua shook her head. In a previous battle, there was no room for concealment. The slightest misstep would have resulted in death, and no one would be stupid enough to conceal their power. So, did that woman in the blue palatial dress receive a massive boost in power during the battle? Shi Hua was in disbelief. Who were these people? She immediately flew through the air on the countless golden rocks around her, hurtling toward the 3,000 moonlight discs in the sky like a streak of golden light. The 2 attacks clashed and exploded incessantly, creating a dazzling spectacle. The continuous output of power made Shi Hua quite exhausted, but she couldn't let her guard down. Boom! The air around Shi Hua suddenly became very active, and all of its power was released. That tall and arrogant figure was once again engulfed by the sudden explosion. Damn it! I'm going to kill you. A disheveled figure rushed out from the explosion before rushing toward the handsome man in the distance in a frenzy. When she said that they couldn't let down their guard, she was referring to the terrifying explosions that Xian Yuan Cheng would launch from time to time. Her clothes were torn because of Xian Yuan Cheng. Her face turned black because of Xian Yuan Cheng, and she was injured because of Xian Yuan Cheng. This was a deep-seated hatred that could never be resolved. The extremely beautiful woman in the blue palace dress was clearly an assassin, but in Marshal Sherhua's eyes, the handsome man in the white dress was more likely to be an assassin. All of a sudden, the air around her exploded, catching her off guard. If this wasn't an assassination, then what was? Marshal Sherhua charged towards Xian Yuancheng. However, Xian Yuancheng's expression didn't change in the slightest. Instead, he became even more calm and collected. He wielded an ancient yellow sword in his hand, and the projection of a yin and yang fish appeared beneath his feet. Countless streams of white wind revolve around his body like clouds and mist, allowing him to predict the enemy's movements and also slow down the enemy's attacks. He wasn't flustered in the slightest. The myriad spirit Tai Chi Dao was the Dao that he was most proficient in. Explosions and whatnot were just side effects. After cultivating the myriad spirit Tai Chi Dao, he would be able to block and nullify all of his enemy's attacks. Sherhua appeared before him in the blink of an eye, and her pink and white petals tore through the white mist and streams of wind like blades. Xian Yuancheng's expression remained unchanged as he charged forward with his sword in hand. 3 seconds later, Xian Yuancheng threw up a mouthful of blood, and his white robes were stained red as he retreated toward the rear with wounds riddled all over his body. At the same time, he continued to use explosions to slow down Sherhua. "Don't run." Marshal Sherhua chased after him, with killing intent surging from her body. Xian Yuancheng had wanted to use his myriad spirit Tai Chi Dao to slow down his enemy, but he was instantly defeated. He had no choice but to continue to use explosions to slow down Marshal Sherhua. As expected, explosions were the most practical skills to use. Xian Yuancheng admitted this with a heavy heart as he fled for his life. Seeing that Sherhua had turned her attention to Xian Yuancheng, Su Qianyun decided to launch another sneak attack. Her moonlight disk appeared and disappeared unpredictably, and she tried to assassinate Sherhua over and over again, annoying her to no end. A blue moonlight disk slashed toward Sherhua from behind. Sherhua didn't even turn her head as she hurled a golden rock toward the moonlight disk behind her. Bam! The moonlight disk was knocked flying again. No matter what kind of attack it was unable to escape from Sherhua's powerful senses. However, a slender and lithe figure suddenly rushed out from under the shadow of the moonlight disk. The silver light transformed into a streak of light that pierced towards Sherhua with boundless killing intent. "You finally made your move." Sherhua was elated as opposed to being alarmed. All of the golden rocks flying around her, as well as the countless sharp killing flowers flying in the air, all of them aimed toward her. Yi Ling had to face almost all of Great General Sherhua's attacks as soon as she appeared. However, to Sherhua's surprise, there was no hint of panic on Yi Ling's face. There was only one expression on her face, and that was that she was going to die. Sherhua was quite perplexed. There was no way that Yi Ling could kill her in her current state. If she were to continue onward, Yi Ling would most likely be insta-killed. But why was this woman still charging forward? Was she not afraid of death? At this moment, Sherhua suddenly noticed that the projection of a black and white yin-yang formation had appeared on the ground beneath her feet, and at the center of it was none other than the place where she was standing. When was this set up? Could it be during the explosion? Sherhua's expression shifted drastically as a realization suddenly occurred to her. Yi Ling closed in on the yin-yang symbol, and her eyes, which were as black as gemstones, shone with an enchanting light. Her lips curled up slightly, and the divine weapon in her hand, the sword to send you safely on your way, gave off boundless silver light. Everything happened almost in the blink of an eye. Yi Ling's body disappeared, and all of Sherhua's attacks missed. At the same time, Yi Ling's figure appeared above the yin-yang formation, and both of them flew toward Sherhua at the same speed. The sword fell. A sword projection froze the entire sky. Sherhua didn't even have a chance to unleash another attack before a terrifying tearing sensation erupted from her neck. Heaven and earth flipped over in her eyes as her head spun. She knew that Yiling was proficient in shadow movement techniques, but never would she have thought that Xianyuan Cheng would leave behind a yin-yang formation after an explosion, thereby creating the ideal space for Yiling to use her shadow movement technique. Marshal Sure Hua hadn't expected this kind of tacit understanding and creative teamwork. In the end, she still lost to a few return to void stage mighty figures. Great General Sure Hua heaved a forlorn sigh in her heart as she slowly closed her eyes. Yiling panted heavily, but there was a hint of elation on her face. Her face, which had become deathly pale from overexertion, was now flushed with a hint of color, creating quite an enchanting sight to behold. "Master, I did it!" She gripped the silver dagger in her hand tightly as she turned toward the battlefield in the distance with a smile on her face, as if to say that she was no longer the disciple who would only be a burden to her master. She could also fight alongside her master and destroy powerful enemies on the battlefield. Chapter 1551. This was Yiling's unique emotion. Her master held a very important position in her heart. Being able to defeat a powerful enemy and prove to her master that she was useful was a greater sense of accomplishment than beating a powerful enemy herself. Yiling, Xianyuan Cheng, and Su Qianyan had just defeated a Heaven Pioneer stage great general, and their energy was completely depleted, but they still looked around to see if any of their comrades needed help. The most powerful returned to void stage mighty figure under Nua's command. The fifth sage wore a white cape and yellow tracksuit, and his red fists were imbued with earth-shattering power. "Huh!" he roared and threw a punch at Marshal Mia in front of him. As the fist fell, the fist force compressed the void to the extreme, flattening and compressing the void to the extreme. It even bloomed with extremely dazzling white light, as if the void had exploded and triggered a chain of energy release. Mia harumphed lightly before also launching a fist. An earth-shattering collision ensued, and an earth-shattering boom erupted as the earth within a radius of over 50 kilometers was pulverized. The fist sage was knocked back for several kilometers, and he threw up a mouthful of blood, but his battle intent was still surging as an expression of admiration appeared on his face. "You were able to take a serious punch from me. You're truly well-deserving of being a Heaven Enlightenment realm powerhouse, to have the ability to be 50-50 with me." Mia's expression darkened upon hearing this. 50-50? Can you at least tell the two Blood Tribe mighty figures beside you to piss off when you say that? Cassidy's sword intent soared into the sky. A sinister, ghostly aura revolved around Merlin's body, and a terrifying power erupted from his arms. That's right, the two holy blood cult fanatics had finally come to help the Fist Sage. The Fist Sage chortled with glee. "I wanted to have a fair battle with you, but they insisted on coming to help me, so I had no choice but to offend you." Mia's chest trembled with rage, but there was nothing she could do. At this moment, Cassidy, Merlin, and the Fist Sage joined forces to battle Mia again. Even a Heaven Pioneer stage great general would find it extremely difficult to face three mighty figures at the return to Void Pinnacle stage at the same time. Very soon, Mia was besieged by the three of them, and she died from exhaustion and severe injuries. Great General's Wei Yi situation was the best, as he only had to face a return to Void Final Stage mighty figure. His injuries were also the lightest out of all the marshals. Apart from a few deep wounds where the bones could be seen, there were only some superficial wounds. The only drawback was that he couldn't move, because if he moved carelessly, the merciless light particles would cut through his skin. Zoe stood in the white square space with a look of despair on her face. She was locked in the same position by countless light particles. Her clothes were gone, and only a cloud of white mist covered her body. Streaks of blood appeared on his body, but they were shallow and did not harm his foundation. It was an injury left behind when he probed the light particle lines. If he was confident that he could live happily even if his body was sliced into tens of thousands of cubes, then he could indeed try to break into Ling's white cube space. Is it not done yet? Zoe asked, feeling like crying. Bai Ling wore a pair of semi-transparent speckle glasses, and a divine Tao light erupted from her hand, enshrouding Zoe's blood, bones, as well as all of the other parts of her body. A faint smile appeared on her face. Wait a while longer. Is it because of the environment? Your body's tissue activity is even more gentle than that of the heavenly human tribe beings I've studied in the past. Your body is in a state of super-quantum entanglement that is both dependent and free. Not bad. A satisfied smile appeared on Bai Ling's face. Cold sweat poured down Zoe's face. That's right, this heavenly human tribe great general had been reduced to Bai Ling's experimental subject. If it weren't for the fact that he still had absolute confidence in the two heavenly gods and was waiting for them to come and save him, he would most likely have already crashed into the particle formation and committed suicide. There was no way he would be willing to continue living like this. Bai Ling was most likely taking advantage of Zoe's psychological state to happily conduct experiments and collect materials. Experimenting on a living subject was undoubtedly better than experimenting on a dead subject, so she cherished this opportunity very much. Both of them had their own ideas, and they cooperated quite well throughout the entire process. Great generals he felt like he was in a pretty good situation. Aside from the fact that some parts of his body had been sliced off, he hadn't sustained any mental injuries. The brother who was dealing with the little red flower in the distance was in a much more pitiful state. In the end, he was gang-raped by over 100 muscular monks with benevolent smiles on their faces, creating an extremely gruesome and tragic scene. In any case, he had left an indelible impression on all of the great generals. In any case, they wouldn't be able to forget him even in death. 9 awe-inspiring, majestic heaven pioneer realm marshals. Now, only great general who was still alive, Tina, Xiao Hong, and Xin Yuan Cheng didn't interfere the sight of Bai Ling's final great general. Instead, they left him to Bai Ling. This was an act of absolute trust. There was no need for words. All of them turned their eyes toward the battlefield between Enlin and the Celestial Arch. This was a heavenly god-level battle, and even from afar, they were struck by a sense of horror. Every single attack was imbued with the power to annihilate heaven and earth, and if they were to get too close, they could be struck by the shock waves or even perish. This is great. The Celestial Arch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake have dispelled the heavenly god's curse of karma, and that heavenly god is now on the back foot. He deserves this. Take advantage of his weakness to kill him. The male heavenly god has already awakened 8 divine halos. But why do I feel like heavenly goddess Lin Yu is more powerful than him, even though she's awakened 7 divine halos? Perhaps they're using different methods of using their divine halos. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu is like a lunatic. At this moment, most of the spectators had turned toward Enlin with concern in their eyes. Enlin and the Phoenix had joined forces to battle heavenly goddess Lin Yu, and he was now on the back foot. Even though he had unleashed his heavenly wind power, he was only barely able to keep himself alive. He was in a perilous situation the entire time, and he didn't even have a chance to retaliate. Enlin was in a very panicked state, but he was determined to wear heavenly goddess Lin Yu down. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu seemed to have figured out Enlin's plan, and a smile of rage appeared on her face. You want to fight a battle of attrition? What makes you think you have the power to hold me off? She launched another vicious punch toward Enlin as she spoke. Enlin looked at the ball of wind around his body, upon which the power of his fist was beginning to wane, and his body was forced into retreat by a burst of power. Rumble, a massive trench was instantly gouged into his back by Lin Yu's fist. Lin Yu's attack had missed for the 100th time. Any human being would become extremely irritable after missing their attack so many times in a row. This was especially true for heavenly goddess Lin Yu, who had a bad temper to begin with. You forced me to do this. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu's expression gradually darkened as she stared at Enlin, and a red divine halo began to appear over her heart. Chapter 1552. Enlin's expression shifted again upon seeing Lin Yu unleash her 8th divine halo. Heavenly God Jordan's divine halo was most likely of the same type as Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's divine halo. Heavenly God Jordan's 8th divine halo had created such a massive commotion, so Lin was naturally aware of it. The 8th divine halo was a cursed divine halo of karma. The power imbued within this divine halo was far too peculiar and mysterious. Even the celestial Arch had been struck by it, so Lin was not confident that he could withstand it. The evil-slaying sword flew out from Lin's back almost without any hesitation, and he gathered the power of the heavenly wind god into his sword before slashing it down. This was an absolute attack that could slice through all things in this world, the heavenly blade. The sword fell, and a thin white line sliced heaven and earth in half, imbued with absolute slicing power. Even though the power of the heavenly wind god would be severely restricted by the will of the heavenly Tao on the Taichu continent, it was still a peerless power in this world. No matter how it was restricted, it was still the overlord of all wind powers. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu sensed danger, and the blue defensive divine halo around her waist instantly materialized a shield in front of her. The heavenly blade struck the shield, upon which an extremely dazzling light erupted, as if two completely different powers of the heavenly gods were battling one another. And Lin knew that the power unleashed by Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu through her divine halo couldn't be considered as the power of the heavenly gods. It could only be considered as a pseudo-heavenly god at most. Even though pseudo-heavenly gods weren't that pure, they were still imbued with the paramount will of the heavens, so they were still able to keep the power of the true heavenly gods at bay. The shield quickly cracked like glass. The power of the heavenly blade was also gradually weakening. Lin Yu chortled with glee as the shield was about to crumble, and she stomped her foot into the air, upon which a golden shield, a white shield, a purple shield. If the quality wasn't enough, then quantity would make up for it. And Lin's lips twitched upon seeing this. Lin Yu was clearly letting herself loose by unleashing the power of her divine halo with no regard for its properties. It was actually very difficult to battle a lunatic like her. Perhaps she would become enraged and try to take you down with her. With this in mind, he couldn't help but think back to the heavenly time god's self-detonation. This experience had left a huge shadow in Lin's heart. The heavenly time god was a lunatic, and heavenly goddess Lin Yu was also a lunatic. Holy **T. Why did he keep encountering these lunatics? After destroying Lin Yu's 3 shields, Skyblade's power dissipated into thin air. And Lin took a deep breath before swinging his sword toward heavenly goddess Lin Yu again. Another heavenly blade flew through the air at incredible speed, and the evil-slaying sword struck heavenly goddess Lin Yu's shield just as it was about to fall. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu had no choice but to unleash her barrier again. At the same time, a cold smile appeared on her face. What? You're afraid I'll use my curse of karma, so you're going to attack first? Do you want to continue this battle of attrition? That's a good idea. The shield in front of the white-haired woman suddenly started to change shape, forming multiple layers of protection around her body. Bang! She tore through the void and charged toward Lin. But can you stop me? Heavenly goddess Lin Yu pushed the heavenly blade toward Lin in an extremely frenzied and fearless manner. Along the way, she extended a snowy white finger and gently pierced through the protective barrier before tapping on the blade of wind, as if she was trying to forcibly establish a connection through her enemy's spell technique, just like Heavenly God Jordan had done. However, even though her finger was about to break, she was still unable to establish a connection. And Lin didn't even know what to say upon seeing this. Heavenly God Jordan was only able to establish a connection with the Celestial Arch, as the Celestial Arch seal was a spell technique created by the Celestial Arch himself. However, Lin had stolen his heavenly wind power, which was a spell technique created by the heavenly wind god, so it was completely different. Even if he were to establish a curse of karma, the target of the curse would most likely be the heavenly wind god. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu had also realized this, and she pounced toward Lin without any hesitation. The red divine halo on her chest imbued her fist as she launched an attack toward Lin. If she couldn't establish a connection through spell techniques, then she would establish a connection through physical contact. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's fist crashed into Lin's wind shield, and its speed began to slow down. However, Lin Yu's speed and power were both significantly higher after activating her 8 divine halos, and Lin's instincts told him that there was no way to evade this attack. If things continued like this, he was definitely going to be struck. And Lin's heart jolted with shock, and he instinctively pulled out his mirror from his storage ring. He couldn't face Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu head-on at a time like this, so he would have to let the vermilion bird mirror do the job. At this moment, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's fist had already fallen. Boom! An extremely terrifying power swept forth, and the power of the karma curse also erupted forth. A dazzling light erupted from the vermilion bird mirror, as if it was trying to repel the paramount while imbued within Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's fist. Oh! A crisp, tender, yet extremely enraged scream erupted. Idiotin, what the hell are you doing? It hurts, ah! Crack! The sound of something shattering abruptly erupted. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was blasted flying for over 10 kilometers by an unparalleled force, and she felt as if her arm were going to be completely crippled. PFFF. Blood trickled down from the corners of Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's lips. She hadn't held back in her attack against Lin, so she had been struck by her most powerful attack when she was completely defenseless. And Lin had no time to be elated. Instead, he turned toward the vermilion bird mirror with a panicked expression. The smooth surface of the vermilion bird mirror was already riddled with cracks, and it was as if it had transformed from a young and flawless maiden into a frail old woman with wrinkles all over its face. Little Sparrow, are you all right? And Lin was panicking. Never would he have thought that the vermilion bird mirror would crack open after taking a single attack from Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. The vermilion bird mirror had been with him for so many years and had saved him from many perilous situations, so they had a very good relationship. Even though they would often bicker or argue with one another, there was still a deep respect for one another. Now, the vermilion bird mirror had cracked open. It was as if Lin's best friend had died, and he was on the verge of tears. Don't you know what's happening to me? My face is cracked open. Wah! And Lin, you stupid C asterisk and T. You be asterisk starred. You F asterisk king idiot. I'm not done with you. Oh, the vermilion bird mirror let loose a torrent of abuse as it sobbed, and Lin heaved a long sigh of relief. Thank goodness you can still speak. You're not dead yet, thank goodness. F asterisk CKU. You can't see me. The vermilion bird mirror suddenly felt a warm sensation on its surface. It was at a complete loss for words, and an expression of astonishment appeared on its face. And Lin picked up the vermilion bird mirror with excitement and planted a kiss on its cracked surface. Chapter 1553. And Lin didn't actually think too much about it. The vermilion bird mirror had saved him on many occasions, and he was extremely grateful to see that the vermilion bird mirror was still alive. So he gave a kiss. It was just a kiss from a mirror. This was like a jade pendant that fell to the ground and didn't shatter, only for someone to pick it up, kiss it, and then thank the heavens and earth. And then, the vermilion bird mirror exploded. The entire mirror tremored violently. Holy F asterisk CK. Idiotin, have you gone insane? You my first kiss. Wah! The vermilion bird mirror cried for a while before falling completely silent, as if it had died. And Lin, did it become autistic after being kissed by me? You F asterisk king mirror had your first kiss? No, that wasn't the point. The point wasn't it just kissing a mirror? How was he supposed to know that the surface of the mirror was her mouth? This didn't make any sense. And Lin's expression was one of complete disbelief. A sense of rage welled up in Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's heart after being ignored. Her opponent didn't care about her at all. Instead, he was asking about her well-being and even shoving dog food into her mouth. How did it feel to be shoved dog food in her mouth by a mirror? Die! Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu let loose an enraged roar as a golden divine light enveloped her hand before stabbing it toward Lin's heart with a sinister smile on her face. Ha ha! Keep dodging. So what if you can use your heavenly wind power to evade my attack? After establishing a karmic connection, killing myself is the same as killing you. How are you going to evade? Splat. Pure white blood splattered through the air. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu let loose a wail of agony as her hand pierced through her body, upon which blood flowed like milk onto her snowy white hand blade. This was the feeling of her heart being torn apart. She was in a lot of pain, but her expression was one of extreme fanaticism as she stared at Enlin with anticipation, hoping to see him wail in agony. Enlin was also very nervous, and he swallowed a regenerative immortal pill in advance. Master! Yiling clenched her fists tightly as she spectated from afar with a concerned expression. Master! Big brother and classmate Enlin, venerated forefather. Everyone outside the arena was shocked when they saw this. They knew that with the destruction of the Vermilion Bird Mirror, Enlin could very well follow in the footsteps of the Celestial Arch. Everyone's hearts were in their throats. Bang! There was an explosion. Blood splattered. Screams rang out again. Enlin, the Phoenix, and Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu were all astonished. All of them were staring at Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's heart, where blood had once again blossomed, staining her golden robe white in an extremely poignant manner. That blood-curdling cry had come from none other than Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. Ing. What's going on? And Lin's eyes widened as he stared at Lin Yu's heart, which had exploded twice in a row. It looked like her heart was really beyond saving. Could it be? And Lin thought back to the Vermilion Bird Mirror and the reflection spell technique. Although the sparrow is broken, the spell reflection effect is still there. The sparrow has reflected Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's curse of karma back to her, thereby allowing her to establish a connection with herself. After that, if Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu were to injure herself, she would be able to use the power of karma to reflect upon herself, thereby creating a double whammy. And Lin spoke with an excited expression. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's blood flow was disrupted upon hearing this, and she threw up another large mouthful of blood. There was only one thought flashing through her mind. What the F***ck did I just do? I killed myself twice. Buy one get one free? Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu felt as if 10,000 mythological beasts were stampeding over her heart. After figuring out what had happened in an extremely short period of time, the green divine halo behind her began to unleash its regenerative power in a frenzy in an attempt to recover from the injury to her heart. And Lin was not going to let her have her way upon seeing this. Eat this, Heavenly Blade! And Lin immediately unleashed his heavenly wind power and slashed toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had no choice but to unleash a portion of her power to defend herself against Enlin's attack. The Phoenix was also a ruthless person who wanted to take her life when she saw that she was sick. She immediately let out a loud cry and spat out the Nirvana heaven-splitting flame, burning the heavens and swallowing the earth. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu originally had a huge advantage, but she was now at a disadvantage, and she could only defend herself against the torrential attacks of the two mighty figures. And all of this was due to her mistake in unleashing her curse of karma. Xinyuan Chung, Cassidy, and the others were all ecstatic, but they also couldn't help but grumble. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu and Heavenly God Jordan had been as ferocious as dogs back when they had their 7 divine halos, but after activating their 8th divine halo and unleashing their curse of karma, the tables were instantly turned. Heavenly Gods Lin Yu and Jordan were being bashed like dogs, as expected of a curse of karma. However, it wasn't cursing their enemies, but themselves. One of them had almost destroyed her body and soul, while the other had punctured her heart twice in a row. If this wasn't a curse, then what was? It was all thanks to the assistance of the 8th divine halo and the idiotic tactics of the 2 heavenly gods that Enlin and the Celestial Arch were finally able to see the light of victory. The attacks were still relentlessly raging. Heavenly God Jordan's body and consciousness had both been severely wounded, and he could only squeeze more and more power into himself to recover from his injuries while defending himself against the combined attacks of the Celestial Arch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake. As a result, the feeble Heavenly God Jordan was unable to keep up with the relentless barrage of attacks, and his injuries continued to worsen. He could only unleash more power to recover from his injuries, but he was unable to keep up with the attacks, thereby creating a vicious cycle. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu wasn't much better off. And Lin was clearly on the brink of death, but he still forced himself to unleash 5 heavenly blades in a row, as if he were trying to exhaust her to death. However, it had to be said that it was very effective. Heavenly Goddess Lin, you didn't even have time to unleash multiple shields, and the residual power of the heavenly blades pierced through her body, inflicting 2 extremely severe wounds on her body. The 2 heavenly gods were clearly in a very dire situation. It was only a matter of time before they were defeated. Unless they could become even more powerful and obtain the power of new divine halos, there was no way they could turn the tables. So were these heavenly gods going to obtain new divine halos? All of the spectators, as well as Lin, the celestial arch, and the others had the same question in their hearts. This question was like a massive mountain weighing down on everyone's hearts. No one knew how many divine halos a divine heaven stage heavenly human could activate. As such, no one dared to say that they were going to win this battle for sure. Boom! A golden pillar of light fell from the sky and blasted Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu to the ground. The phoenix spread its wings and looked down upon the heavenly gods with a haughty expression. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was like a goddess who had fallen to the mortal world. Her entire body was riddled with wounds and charred black wounds, and she appeared to be in an extremely sorry state. The rot on her wrist had already spread to her entire arm. No one noticed that her pupils had gradually turned from pure golden to inky black. Chapter 1554. Heavenly God Jordan couldn't help but yell upon seeing Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's condition. Lin Yu, calm down. Don't use it no matter what. The extremely disheveled Lin Yu slowly stood up from the ground. Her long, snowy white hair draped over her shoulders, and her inky black eyes were imbued with a peculiar suction force, as if they were going to engulf everything. The blood-red sky shone its light on the devastated land, fusing with the dark gray soil. It was as if the earth was seeping with blood, and there was a tragic silence in the desolation. She raised her head and looked into the blood-colored and despairing heavens. The corners of her lips twitched, as if she wanted to laugh. With a bit of distress, she said, "I'm sorry, I really can't calm down. It really is too infuriating. How can the Celestial Clan's dignity be beaten into the ground like this? What else can I do? I can only kill all of them." Heavenly God Jordan still wanted to say something. Boom! An inky black divine halo appeared above Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's head. This was the first time a divine halo had appeared above a heavenly goddess's head. The dark divine light seemed to be trying to suck in all things between heaven and earth. And Lin had never seen such pure darkness before. It was as if there was no light or anything around the divine halo, and darkness was eternal. Lin Yu's pristine, flawless skin and snowy white dress created a stark contrast with the black halo above her head. If it weren't for her divine halo, and Lin would have been instantly plunged into darkness. Almost everyone was given a fright upon seeing this. Everyone could sense the purest power emanating from the divine halo. This was darkness and terror that none of the previous divine halos could compare to. And Lin's expression became extremely grave, and he immediately unleashed another heavenly blade toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. The blade materialized from the wind, sliced through all things before crashing down upon the woman on the ground with boundless sharpness. The woman stood on the spot and raised her head. Her inky black eyes contracted slightly, and she seemed to be glaring at the heavenly blade as a black ripple surged through the air toward the heavenly blade. Bam! The heavenly blade began to distort. The pure white blade radiance seemed to have fallen into an endless abyss and was devoured by the darkness. Its might became weaker and weaker, dimmer and dimmer. When it reached Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu raised her fair, jade-like hand and gave the heavenly blade a nonchalant slap, upon which it shattered and disappeared into nothingness. And Lin's eyes widened, and he couldn't help but take a deep breath. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had to conjure up at least 3 to 4 divine halos to defend herself against this attack. Now, he was able to block the heavenly blade with just a black divine ring? Sigh, why did you have to go so far? Heavenly God Jordan heaved a forlorn sigh as he looked at Lin Yu with furrowed brows. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu stood on the ground, and the complex expression on her face had completely disappeared. Instead, she appeared extremely cold and tranquil as she looked up at Enlin. In that instant, Enlin's entire body was struck by an extremely powerful sense of peril. This was a feeling that he had never experienced before. It was as if there was an extremely terrifying, chaotic beast in the boundless darkness that was trying to drag him into the boundless darkness with its sharp claws. Whoosh! Another burst of tremors erupted. All of Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's other 8 divine halos suddenly detached themselves from her hands, feet, waist, back, neck, and heart before fusing into the black divine halo above her head. No, rather than fusing into the divine halo, it was more accurate to say that they were being engulfed by the black divine halo. The rotten parts on Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's arms also quickly contracted before disappearing. Her temperament became even more refined. Looking at her flawless arms that were as white as jade, a faint smile of satisfaction appeared on her face. This was the first time Lin had seen Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu display any emotions in her current state. It had to be said that her love for beauty could break through some kind of barrier. Soon, her cold and indifferent gaze converged on Lin's body again. I'm going to show you the true power of a divine heaven stage cultivator with all 9 divine halos open. Lin Yu's voice was very pleasant to the ears, but it sounded like the whisper of a demon, sending chills running down one's spine. And Lin felt like he was done for. He knew that his opponent was most likely the most powerful opponent he had ever faced. His nerves tensed up, and he activated his heavenly wind power to its very maximal extent. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu stepped forward, and spatial ripples surged through the air. In the next instant, she had already appeared behind Lin. So fast, Lin was already struggling to keep up with Lin Yu's 8 divine halos. Now that she had activated all 9 of her divine halos, Lin Yu's speed had increased explosively once again. Even if Lin were to unleash his senses to the fullest extent, he would still be unable to keep up with her. All the hairs on Lin's body stood on end, and he immediately turned around. Wind of absolute power. A barrier of wind instantly materialized, keeping all powers at bay. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu unleashed a simple punch toward Lin. Her delicate fist was enshrouded in a dark divine light, and it was like a bolt of white lightning flashing through the boundless darkness before striking the indestructible barrier of wind. 2 bursts of power imbued with the power of absolute laws clashed at this moment. And Lin could sense a boundless amount of energy hurtling toward him. There was no end to this boundless energy, and there was not even the slightest hint of hope. There was only absolute darkness and nothingness. This was a power of darkness that he had never encountered before, and it could engulf him at any moment. And Lin knew that if it weren't for the protection of his heavenly wind power, he would have been obliterated by that punch a long time ago. He was just about to take advantage of the wind of absolute power to defend himself against Lin Yu's fist before unleashing an evasive movement technique. However, Lin Yu's fist pierced through the wind of absolute power and was hurtling toward his lower abdomen. Even with the wind of absolute power as an impediment, the fist was still far too fast. Lin twisted his waist, and the fist brushed past his waist, upon which a dark divine light instantly engulfed the flesh on the side of his waist into nothingness. Bam! The fist was imbued with immense power, and it knocked Lin flying along with it. The sound of internal organs and bones being crushed rang out. Lin flew through the air like a cannonball before crashing into the ground, causing the earth to quake violently. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu descended from the sky, and her flawless features and perfect figure made her appear as if she were a celestial maiden descending upon the mortal world. However, the black divine halo above her head, the crimson sky behind her, and the emotionless expression on her face made her appear as if she were a demon descending upon this world. These two dispositions were contradictory, yet harmonious at the same time. And Lin lay on the ground and looked on as heavenly goddess Lin Yu descended, as if she were a death god who was harvesting his life. Right at this moment, the phoenix hurtled through the air for over 50 kilometers, and a sea of flames erupted behind it, incinerating space itself as it crashed toward heavenly goddess Lin Yu like the sun. F***CK off. Lin Yu unleashed a palm strike. The phoenix, which was like a falling sun, was actually slapped away by her like a rubber ball. Lin Yu continued to pounce toward Lin with ferocious killing intent. And Lin, what kind of vendetta was this? Couldn't she deal with little Huang first? Chapter 1555. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's speed, power, and reaction speed were all extremely difficult to deal with. And Lin had already fallen into a dire situation. He wasn't even confident that he could withstand Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's next attack. If he really couldn't, then he was really going to be screwed. He couldn't defend, so he had to attack. However, even Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was not afraid of the heavenly blade materialized by Lin's heavenly wind power, so what else could pose a threat to her? He couldn't fight her head-on. It was best to launch a surprise attack. Not only did it have to be powerful, but it had to be a power that could ignore distance and distance. A power that was fast and vicious. Got it. And Lin swung his evil-slaying sword in the blink of an eye. Vanquish the heavens and slay all evil, annihilation. An invisible power pierced through space and struck Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's chest in a peculiar pattern. And Lin had no time to react. He could only see a woman hurtling toward him, and he didn't even have time to aim before unleashing a powerful attack upon her chest. Bam! Pure white liquid splattered all over his face, and a peculiar fragrance wafted through the air. This was a very unique scent of blood. And Lin was just about to unleash a fist upon Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, but a massive hole had already appeared in her chest, as if it had been annihilated by a paramount power. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu stared blankly at Lin with a dumbstruck expression. And Lin's heart also jolted with shock. He didn't think that little Xie would be able to destroy Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu even after she had activated her 9th divine halo. He immediately squeezed out more power from his body in an attempt to unleash another annihilation technique. This was not enough to kill Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu recovered in an extremely short time, and her reaction speed was also extremely fast as she instantly disappeared from Lin's field of vision. And Lin's nerves were extremely tense, and he unleashed his divine sense over 50 kilometers while unleashing his divine inspection technique to stare intently at the space up ahead in an attempt to keep up with his opponent. However, his opponent was simply too fast, and her body transformed into a series of afterimages that were impossible to track. The evil-slaying sword had to lock onto its target before unleashing its annihilation technique in order to inflict damage. Now, that Lin couldn't even aim at Lin Yu. How could he hit her? If he randomly used skills and relied on luck, wasting his energy for nothing, it would be suicide in a battle of this level. And Lin looked at the dazzling movement technique, his body a little sluggish. In my eyes, you're as slow as a snail. You can't even see what I'm doing, let alone keep up with me. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's voice sounded. Because of the rapid change of location, her voice seemed to come from all directions. And Lin chuckled. Don't underestimate snails. They can also become Tao integration stage mythological beasts. In an instant, Lin Yu appeared in front of Lin in a flash. Her pitch-black eyes stared at him coldly, as if she wanted to pull him into an endless darkness. Unfortunately, you're not a snail. And Lin could see that the gaping hole in her chest had already been completely healed as she flashed through the air. Her snow-white skin was exposed, and there were no flaws at all. So white, so big. Pooh! No, what astonishing regenerative abilities. And Lin was just about to unleash his vanquish the heavens and slay all evil annihilation technique again when Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu disappeared again. In the next instant, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had already appeared on Lin's left, and she turned like a butterfly before lashing out with a ferocious kick. Both the timing and the distance were perfect, and Lin could only see the white crystal shoe, which was enshrouded in the paramount intent of the divine halo of darkness, transform into a mixture of black and white before crashing into the wind of absolute power. The wind of absolute power had the effect of buffering and even isolating all power. Even if it couldn't block the wind of absolute power, and Lin could still use the gentle power of the wind to propel himself forward at high speed. However, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's side kick was as explosive as fire, and even the gentle and supple wind was transformed into a violent storm with absolute power. The power contained in the wind instantly bent his waist, breaking his tendons and bones, and even his spine was bent. Bam! An earth-shattering boom erupted, and Lin was knocked flying by the wind before tumbling to the ground, and the coffin behind him also crashed to the ground. Immediately afterward, he threw up another mouthful of blood. It could be said that this was the first time he had been wounded by his heavenly wind power. Why was Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's divine halo even more powerful than his heavenly wind power? This didn't make any sense. How about it? Lin Yu made her way toward Lin in a graceful manner. Do you understand the disparity between us now? She extended a hand, and a black long sword appeared in her hand. The pure black color of the sword struck one with a sense of horror. In that instant, the sky and clouds were completely obscured, and only the darkness remained in her hand. And Lin gripped his evil-slaying sword tightly as he crawled up from the ground. At this moment, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had already appeared before him with a cold and emotionless expression in her eyes. It's over, and Lin struggled to resist, only to discover that his energy had already been completely depleted. His body was extremely exhausted from using the power of the heavenly handle and all types of high-rank spell techniques. After being squeezed for so long, his body was like a desert, and there was not a single drop of water that could be extracted from it. Was this really the end? And Lin's body trembled slightly, and he gripped his evil-slaying sword tightly before turning to swing it. Even if his speed, power, and techniques were all inferior to Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's, he was going to die fighting. Boom! Something suddenly exploded behind him, and Lin let loose a wail of anguish, and he almost fell to the ground again. A red shadow crashed toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. This was the lid of the immortal tool Blood, Soul, Jade coffin. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was not alarmed by this sudden turn of events. She harumphed coldly before slashing her black long sword through the air, upon which the immortal tool coffin lid was sliced in half. The coffin lid fell to the ground. A woman in a jade dress appeared behind Lin. Her eyes were pure golden, and her holy flame wings spread open like feathers. Transparent golden dragon scales appeared all over her body, and her aura soared explosively. She had unleashed her Vermilion Bird True Dragon and Vermilion Bird Mystic techniques again, and Lin stared at the woman who had suddenly appeared with astonishment on his face, as if she were the only figure in this world. The battle had been too intense, and he had forgotten that he was carrying the coffin and Su Xiaolan on his back. Su Xiaolan's sudden appearance was like a beam of light that pierced through the darkness that enshrouded his heart. Didn't you say you wanted to see the heaven-crushing techniques I've mastered? Her voice was as pleasant and melodious as an oriole's. She took a glance at Lin, and a faint blush appeared on her face, perhaps due to the fact that her holy flame wings were too hot. Lin Yu was not going to wait for Su Xiaolan and Lin to exchange pleasantries, and she immediately charged over. She was going to kill them all at once, so they should be a family. Su Xiaolan's fingers formed a strange seal that resembled both a dragon and a phoenix. Heaven-crushing technique. Love trumps the heavens. Su Xiaolan roared with shame etched on her face. Lin. Chapter 1556. Love trumps the heavens? This was clearly an intense battle, but Lin couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood upon hearing this. What kind of magical name was this? And it wasn't just him. Even the caster himself had a look of shame on his face. Couldn't Su Xiaolan just change her name? And Lin was grumbling internally, but he also felt an indescribable sense of warmth. It was just like when your wife suddenly did something silly for you. You would complain about it, but the corners of your mouth would also involuntarily curl up. You couldn't help but smile, feeling warm and happy. Soon, Lin realized just how appropriate the name Xiaolan had come up with was. Tears suddenly flowed from Su Xiaolan's eyes as she made a few hand seals. Wah! Lin, you're so pitiful. Lin, what was going on? Why was she suddenly acting? Could it be that this was an act? But don't worry, I won't let you die. I won't let you leave me again. Su Xiaolan's eyes became more and more determined. This was an emotion that would never be erased, no matter how much time passed. Golden light burst forth from her hands as she made a hand seal. It was as dazzling and eye-catching as the rising sun. Not only was the golden light imbued with the most powerful emotions, but it was also imbued with an extremely powerful heaven-crushing intent, as if love could conquer everything. It formed a stark contrast with Lin Yu's power of darkness. One side was filled with limitless possibilities, while the other side was filled with boundless despair and darkness. Su Xiaolan's voice was gentle but firm. Even if the sky falls, even if you fall and can't fight anymore, I will stand in front of you and be your pillar of support. Gale force winds swept through the air. Su Xiaolan stood in front of Lin, and her hair danced in the wind as boundless golden light reflected in her eyes. So what if it's the heavens? My feelings for you can't be stopped by the heavenly Tao. If the heavens want to deal with us, then we'll destroy the heavens together. I'd rather die than retreat. Su Xiaolan let loose a clear cry, and an extremely powerful diamond-shaped golden light suddenly shot forth from her hand seal. It was divine to the extreme, rich to the extreme, as if it was born from primal chaos, unique and unmatched. When heaven and earth are born, it will always exist. When heaven and earth are destroyed, it will still exist. Once it appears, it will shock heaven and earth. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's expression shifted drastically, and she instinctively sensed danger. She immediately raised her black long sword and slashed it toward the oncoming golden light. Rumble! Heaven and earth were instantly filled with two colors. The eternal darkness and the golden light that was filled with boundless emotions fought against each other. The void cracked for hundreds of miles. The collision of destructive energy made the world seem like it was the end of the world. The celestial arch, white spirit snake, black spirit snake, and heavenly god Jordan were all knocked flying by this power, and they stared at the scenes unfolding before their eyes in astonishment. What's the situation? Su Xiaolan is able to cast such a terrifying spell? This is the power of heaven crushing. It also possesses the power of an essence holy beast. Who would have thought that the combination of an essence holy beast and a heaven-crushing technique will be able to unleash such a terrifying attack? The Celestial Arch and the Spirit Snake Sisters were both surprised and elated to see this. Yi Ling was also cheering loudly for her mistress. Heavenly God, Jordan wore an expression of incredulity. When Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu unleashed her 9th divine halo, he had thought that everyone's chances of survival had been reduced to 0. However, who would have thought that such a freakishly powerful female cultivator would emerge from her coffin? Within the boundless golden light, and Lin looked at Su Xiaolan's back, and her jade barley ink garment danced in the wind, giving him an indescribable sense of security and warmth. He instantly understood everything. Emotion trumps the heavens was a heaven-crushing technique that was a combination of her essential bloodline and the truest emotions. Were emotions power? Just look at Cassidy and Merlin's battle against the ancient Dragon Empress. If fervor and unyieldingness could be used to nurture the heaven-crushing technique, then why couldn't the truest emotions be used as well? Su Xiaolan's emotions toward Lin had been nurtured through countless battles of life and death with him. The entire world had thought that Lin was going to die for sure, but he still persisted for over 100 years. Emotion trumps the heavens. No matter what happened, she was determined to fight by Lin's side. This was the conviction that even if the heavens wanted to kill Lin, she would still be able to raise her sword and fight. Protect, persevere, battle conviction. All types of scorching and sincere emotions were fused into the spell technique to unleash an extremely dazzling light. Furthermore, the true intent of this spell technique would reach its pinnacle when Lin was on the brink of death and completely defenseless. Su Xiaolan hated herself for being so powerless when Lin was on the brink of death. The battle against the Dark Knight Monarch on Earth, the battle against Palace Leader Qing, Li of the Holy Glacial Region, the battle against the Heavenly Wind God of the Celestial Court, the battle against the Heavenly Time God. These situations repeated themselves over and over again. She could only be a bystander. This sense of powerlessness, this strong desire to change, finally materialized into the most powerful emotional energy after coming into contact with the heaven-crushing technique's true intent. If this power were to be unleashed, even the heavens could be vanquished. This was Love Trumps the Heavens. Even though this name was quite shameful, it was very practical and suited Su Xiaolan's feelings very well. On the battlefield, the power of Heavenly Goddess Lin, used Ninth Divine Halo, was absolute darkness. When it clashed with the most dazzling emotions in this world, it was as if two extremes had collided, resulting in the most violent reaction. The shockwaves of energy instantly annihilated everything around them. The two powers clashed in a frenzy, one imbued with the paramount will of the heavens, while the other imbued with an extremely powerful heaven-crushing intent. Su Xiaolan was situated at the center of the energy vortex and was struck by the most terrifying shockwaves. Blood was already trickling down the corners of her lips, but she didn't take a single step back as she stood in front of Lin. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's body had already been forced back quite a bit by the golden energy. Even though they were still locked in a stalemate, an expression of astonishment had appeared on her face. How could this be? What kind of technique is this? I'm clearly on the back foot with my Ninth Divine Halo. Just as Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was astonished, a series of black lines began to appear on her pristine, snowy skin. These black lines formed special veined patterns, as if some kind of energy were quickly circulating within them. Ah! Lin Yu let loose a wail of agony as her aura soared explosively. The black sword projection became more and more terrifying, and an aura that seemed to be able to extinguish all things erupted forth, instantly crushing the golden heaven-crushing light. Su Xiaolan gritted her teeth and held on with all her might. The powerful emotions in her heart were what kept her from collapsing. It was also at this moment that she suddenly felt a large hand encircling her slender waist. Su Xiaolan's heart jolted with shock. At this moment, a gentle voice sounded beside her ear. "Thank you for buying time for me, Xiaolan." And Lin held Su Xiaolan with one arm, while pointing at Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu with his other hand. "As your Tao partner, we should fight our enemies together." A blush appeared on Su Xiaolan's face again upon hearing this. "Your technique is called Love Trumps the Heavens, so I'll call this Finger Love Crushes the Heavens." Chapter 1557. Su Xiaolan faltered slightly before murmuring to herself, "Love trumps the heavens. Love trumps the heavens?" If she were to recite these two sentences in tandem, she would feel a lot less embarrassed. Lin Yu became even more enraged at the sight of Su Xiaolan and Lin hugging each other, whispering sweet nothings, and flinging dog food at one another in the midst of battle. Her black longsword fell with reckless abandon. At this moment, an extremely dazzling golden light had already burst forth from Lin's fingertip. A peerless heaven-crushing intent erupted forth. This was the most essential spell technique of the heaven-crushing sect, the finger of the heavenly Tao. Only the heavenly disciples of the heaven-crushing sect had the right to master the finger of the heavenly Tao, and it could be said to be a paramount heaven-crushing technique. The entire sky was instantly torn in half by the power of the golden finger, and the clouds dissipated as an unstoppable golden energy tore through the air like a surging heavenly river, shattering the space around it. The wind and clouds were transformed by the power of the finger. Enlin imitated Enlin and imbued his own finger of the heavenly Tao with the power of emotion. This power was a powerful emotion that would kill anyone who dared to bully Xiaolan. An extremely powerful emotion fed into the spell technique, and the finger of the heavenly Tao was imbued with the power of emotion, thereby making it even more powerful. At this moment, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's black longsword was already slowly tearing through Su Xiaolan's love trumps the heavens, and it was about to strike the two of them at the same time. However, a dazzling golden light erupted from Lin's fingertip at this moment, and his fingertip struck Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's black longsword. A violent collision ensued. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was struck by an unstoppable power. It was boundless and extremely domineering, as if it could even crush the great Tao. The unstoppable sword strike was abruptly stopped in its tracks. How could this be? Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's eyes widened with incredulity. Wasn't Lin already on the brink of exhaustion? Why did he still have the energy to unleash such a terrifying spell technique? Furthermore, this spell technique was clearly an extremely advanced, heaven-crushing spell technique. The long sword, which was imbued with eternal darkness, was now riddled with cracks that were visible to the naked eye. It was as if a beam of golden light had pierced through the darkness and illuminated everything. What was even more infuriating was that Lin Yu could sense an extremely powerful sense of love from this power. F*CK. What the F*CK is this? Break. Lin Yu let loose a furious roar, and the divine ring above her head began to glow with dazzling divine light. The pitch-black, veined patterns on her body also began to spread, as if they were going to engulf her. The black longsword was then shattered right before her eyes of disbelief. The finger of the heavenly Tao smashed through the black longsword and landed directly on Lin Yu's chest, creating yet another ghastly hole in her body. The golden light traversed the world, illuminating the earth and the sky in a golden radiance. Everywhere it passed, space was shattered into pieces for hundreds of kilometers, and it even left a bottomless trench in the ground. Lin Heave, Xiaolan Realm, Chu Ming Heaven, Air Heaven, Trum, my saint divine trumps Lin to Seifo, and indescribable pain surged through Lin Yu's entire body. What was even more terrifying was that these two powers contained a strong sense of love. One was, even the heavens will destroy anyone who dares to bully Lin. And the other was, I will destroy anyone who dares to bully Xiaolan. Two incomparably intense feelings of love fused together, crazily attacking each other's divine soul, giving the most violent mental blow. Blood-curdling screams resounded throughout heaven and earth. Lin Yu was blasted several tens of thousands of meters away, and she rolled on the ground in a sorry state. The bloody hole in her chest was still flowing with pure white blood, and her body was motionless while her aura was completely concealed. It was unknown whether she was dead or alive. The world regained its tranquility. Everyone stared blankly at the scene in front of them. This was the first time that Xianyuan Cheng, Su Qianyun, and his other companions had seen Lin execute the finger of the heavenly Tao. They were so shocked that their mouths were agape as they stared blankly at the young man who had stretched out his finger. The special effects were gone, but the young man still looked very handsome when he stretched out his finger, and his image became taller. No, how could this be? A divine heaven stage mighty figure with 9 divine halos is invincible in this world. How could she have been defeated just like that? Impossible. Heavenly God Jordan shook his head relentlessly with an expression of disbelief on his face. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, with her 9 divine halos, was indeed invincible in this world. She was even able to easily vanquish the power of the heavenly wind god. Even though the power of the heavenly gods was restricted by the heavenly Tao, Lin Yu's power had already been amply demonstrated. And Lin was completely convinced by the rumors that a divine heaven stage, heavenly human tribe, mighty figure possessed power that rivaled that of a god of creation. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had been defeated by his heaven-crushing techniques. Su Xiaolan's super powerful heaven-crushing techniques and in Lin's heaven-crushing techniques were interlinked, and true love was invincible. In the end, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was still able to crush Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had been fed 2 rounds of dog food, and she tumbled to the ground, and it was unknown whether she was dead or alive. However, what was certain was that she had been severely wounded both physically and mentally. This was perhaps the most pitiful character that Lin had ever seen. How could she not be pitiful after being attacked by the power of love between him and Su Xiaolan? Su Xiaolan's buff mystic technique disappeared, and her body swayed slightly as she was about to collapse. And Lin immediately drew her into his arms before asking in a gentle voice, "Are you all right?" I'm fine." Su Xiaolan shook her head with difficulty. Her features were deathly pale, but she forced a smile onto her face. "I've just overexerted myself, so I need to rest for a while." And Lin nodded in a gentle voice. "Don't worry, I'll protect you. Leave this place to me." And Lin's eyes suddenly rolled into his head as he spoke, and his entire body gave out as he tumbled to the ground with Su Xiaolan in tow. Thump! The 2 of them made intimate contact with the ground. Su Xiaolan and Lin, "Is this what you meant by leave it to you?" Su Xiaolan felt like her head was about to explode. She might have hit her head on the ground, and Lin was feeling very awkward. He was holding on to Su Xiaolan earlier, but when he fell to the ground, it was Su Xiaolan who was holding on to him instead. Furthermore, he was holding on to one of Su Xiaolan's arms, and Lin struggled to crawl up from the ground, only to find that his entire body was completely limp and powerless, and he grimaced in pain from the terrifying backlash he was feeling. Su Xiaolan hugged Lin tightly upon seeing this before pulling out a regenerative immortal pill from her storage ring and feeding it to Lin. "It's all right now, Lin." Su Xiaolan held onto the man in her arms tightly and struggled to get up, only to find that she was unable to. The 2 of them lay motionless on the ground with awkward expressions on their faces. This was most likely the true portrayal of a couple in dire straits. Even though they had achieved victory, and Lin still didn't forget the fine tradition of finishing off an opponent. He raised his head and yelled with all the strength in his body, "Little Huang, finish them off." Chapter 1558. Last hit. In the sky above, the phoenix that had almost been crippled by Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu shuddered. It looked down at Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, and a sense of elation suddenly welled up in its eyes. Beating a dog while it was down was something every vicious beast loved to do the most. Even the proud phoenix was no exception, especially when this dog had bullied it before. The phoenix happily accepted Lin's suggestion, and it spread open its wings before flapping them violently toward Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu. Boundless crimson divine flames fell upon the earth like an ocean, incinerating everything in its path. Naturally, the last hit had to be done thoroughly. The best course of action was to burn Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu into nothingness. The descent of the divine flame was enough to instantly reduce all living beings to nothingness, let alone Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu, whose status was unknown. However, in the next instant, a man covered in injuries and with a weak aura arrived before Lin Yu. He waved his hand and dispersed the god flame that was approaching her. "Don't even think about hurting her again." Heavenly God Jordan spoke in an indifferent voice. "I won't let anyone hurt her again." The phoenix was given a fright by Heavenly God Jordan's sudden appearance. "You think you can protect him?" The celestial arch charged over. "I'll take both of you down at once." "Be careful of his 9th divine halo," Black Spirit Snake cautioned. "Let's finish this battle as soon as possible," White Spirit Snake chimed in. The 3 super mighty figures at the Tao Integration Pinnacle stage were completely exhausted after battling for so long. Heavenly God Jordan had been severely wounded due to his idiotic maneuvers, and he was now on the back foot. They had already taken advantage of this opportunity to attack with all their might, but they were still unable to land a lethal strike. They also knew that they couldn't afford to delay any longer. They had to kill Heavenly God Jordan as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the situation were to change again, none of them would be able to hold on, facing the attack of 3 people. Heavenly God Jordan took a deep breath as he looked at the southern heavenly gate in the distance. Just as he was about to use his final move, a pair of white hands gripped his feet tightly. He looked up and was greeted by the sight of heavenly goddess Lin Yu's dark, empty eyes. Crack! The divine halo of darkness above his head was filled with countless cracks. Rumble! Above the red sky, a dark vortex suddenly appeared. Then, a cylindrical black divine light containing extremely terrifying power fell to the ground. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu stood up unsteadily under the black divine light, and a peculiar smile appeared on her face as she looked down at Lin and Su Xiaolan. The celestial arch, black spirit snake, and white spirit snake joined forces to attack. However, she didn't even look at it. As if she was swatting away annoying flies, she waved her hand. Rumble! Boundless darkness spread out in a ring-shaped attack. The celestial arch, black spirit snake, and white spirit snake could all sense a paramount power that threatened to engulf all things and reduce all existences to nothingness. Bang, bang, bang. After the violent collision, the three experts, who could shake a domain with a single move, were sent flying. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu's expression was completely blank as she made her way toward Lin in a wobbly manner while murmuring something to herself. My master is darkness, so he's naturally unafraid of all things that are visible to light, and Lin didn't care what heavenly goddess Lin Yu was saying. He had already been scared sh*less by this crazy woman. He had always thought of himself as an unkillable cockroach. As long as he dared to fight in the face of danger, he would be able to create miracles. However, only after battling heavenly goddess Lin Yu did he realize who the real cockroach was. Her heart had exploded twice, and she had also been struck by a finger of the heavenly Tao, but she was still able to stand up. Was she going to die or not? Heavenly God Jordan stood silently off to the side, looking at heavenly goddess Lin Yu with a grief-stricken expression. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu seemed to have gotten used to her current state, and she began to charge toward Lin and Su Xiaolan. Su Xiaolan carried Lin in her arms and tried to flee into the distance, only to discover to her dismay that she didn't even have the strength to stand up with Lin in her arms, and Lin and Su Xiaolan were like fish waiting to be slaughtered. They were completely powerless to resist. What do I do? What do I do? And Lin and Su Xiaolan were both extremely concerned as they looked at the approaching heavenly goddess Lin Yu. The darkening sky elongated heavenly goddess Lin Yu's shadow, and it was as if darkness of despair was closing in on her with a hint of slaughter and destruction. The phoenix let loose a cry as the holy nirvana flames fell from the sky. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu raised a hand, and a black protective barrier materialized above her head, keeping the golden flames at bay. At this moment, the attacks of the celestial arch, black spirit snake, and white spirit snake also descended upon them. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu seemed to be a little irritated, and she unleashed a palm toward Lin and Su Xiaolan in the distance. A giant black palm instantly condensed and fell from the sky, bringing with it a great power. If this palm were to fall, Lin and Su Xiaolan would most likely be reduced to mincemeat. Protect me. Protect me. After swallowing an immortal pill, Lin finally had the strength to speak in a loud voice, and tears were on the verge of flowing from his eyes. The celestial arch, white spirit snake, black spirit snake, and the others all faltered upon seeing this. They clearly didn't think that heavenly goddess Lin Yu would still target Lin even in the face of so many powerful beings. What kind of vendetta was this? Did she have to react so violently after being showered with love? The massive palm had already fallen upon Lin and Su Xiaolan. Lin held the woman in his arms as he bade farewell. Xiaolan, I love you. Lin looked at the woman before him, and he was just about to kiss her. Suddenly, a petite figure appeared in front of the two of them. Her large hands grabbed at the two of them like an eagle grabbing chicks, lifting the two of them up. Holy F***CK. And Lin was given a fright upon having his kiss cut off. What the F***CK? You're still flaunting your affection at a time like this? You're drawing heavenly goddess Lin Yu's ire again. Do you know that? A crisp, heavenly voice sounded beside his ears. At this moment, and Lin discovered that his waist had been encircled by a slender arm. Su Xiaolan was also being encircled by another arm. A massive force erupted. The two of them were carried away at an extremely fast speed. Boom! The massive black palm crashed into the ground, leaving a massive crater in its wake. And Lin and Su Xiaolan had managed to evade Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's attack in the nick of time. A faint fragrance wafted through the air, and Lin finally had a chance to raise his head to look at his savior. Her colorful clothes fluttered in the wind. She had a sharp chin, a delicate and flawless oval face, a pair of clear and attractive big eyes, and a refreshing and playful short hair. Even though he was looking up at her, he still felt that she was extremely beautiful. Vermilion Bird Princess. And Lin let loose a cry of surprise and elation. I'm going to toss you out of my hand if you keep talking, the Vermilion Bird Princess said with an enraged expression. She was planning to stand by and watch from the sidelines without interfering. However, she couldn't help but step in after seeing that Lin was about to be slapped to death. For some inexplicable reason, Zhang Xian's mind went blank. Without any hesitation, he made this decision. This D*net impulse. The Vermilion Bird Princess was extremely irritable. Chapter 1559. Everyone was given a massive fright by the sudden appearance of a young woman in a colorful dress. What's going on? Why is there another person here all of a sudden? Such an adorable and powerful young woman. There was no such person in the Kingdom of the Nine States. However, seeing as she was on their side, they all began to cheer along with her. The Vermilion Bird Princess had Su Xiaolan in her left hand and Lin in her right, and she sprinted through the air as if she had kidnapped two people and eloped with them. However, the rage and remorse on her face indicated that she was on the verge of a mental breakdown. What the hell? Why did I jump out to help you? The Vermilion Bird Princess was extremely remorseful. However, Lin was very elated. This proves that you still don't want me to die. Thank you, Vermilion Bird Princess. I'll be sure to repay you in the future. The Vermilion Bird Princess rolled her eyes. Who cares about your repayment? Su Xiaolan could tell from their conversation that their relationship was not simple, but she also knew that this was not the time to be asking questions, so she refrained from doing so. Xiaolan, let me introduce you. This is a friend I met in the Southern Heavenly Wing Nation. Her name is the Vermilion Bird Princess, and Lin introduced. Hello, Vermilion Bird Princess. Thank you for saving us, Su Xiaolan said with a dainty smile. However, she was thinking to herself, and Lin and the Vermilion Bird Princess met in the Southern Heavenly Wing Nation, so why didn't he mention her to her when he came back? And Lin continued. Her true identity is the nine-color divine Vermilion Bird of the Southern Heavenly Wing Nation. She's a kind-hearted bird, so she's a very nice person. So you're the nine-color divine Vermilion Bird? Su Xiaolan was a little astonished. The nine-color divine Vermilion Bird was renowned across the entire continent, not just because of her power, but also because she was the goddess of the bird tribe. Even beings of different tribes would be entranced by the beauty of the nine-colored divine Vermilion Bird. Her beauty had transcended the boundaries of all species. The Vermilion Bird Princess stuck out her tongue with a sweet smile upon hearing Su Xiaolan's words. I am indeed the nine-colored divine Vermilion Bird, but almost no living beings have ever seen my human form. You have to keep this a secret from me. Su Xiaolan nodded blankly. She was struggling to reconcile this adorable young woman with the high and mighty nine-colored divine Vermilion Bird. The sound of an explosion came from behind him. Heavenly Goddess Lin, you had already broken through the Phoenix, the Celestial Arch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake's defenses, and she was charging toward the Vermilion Bird Princess at a speed faster than any of the Tao integration stage super mighty figures. The Vermilion Bird Princess sped onward with two women in her arms, and she gritted her teeth as she looked on at the oncoming Heavenly Goddess Linyu. She wanted to abandon Lin and Su Xiaolan, but she still held onto them tightly. I've really been unlucky for 8 lifetimes. Why did I have to meet someone like you to provoke me? The Vermilion Bird Princess spat as a pair of wings suddenly spread open on her red high heels, and her speed increased explosively once again. She had clearly unleashed a speed, mystic technique. And Lin must die. Heavenly goddess Lin Yu shot forth like a black shadow, and no one could keep up with her. The distance between them continued to shrink, and Lin could feel the vermilion bird princess tightening her arms around his waist. She was clearly extremely nervous. This was actually quite normal. The vermilion bird princess had already experienced just how terrifying heavenly goddess Lin Yu was. Even the celestial arch at the Tao integration pinnacle stage was no match for her. Whoosh! A long spear materialized from a ball of darkness in the distance. The vermilion bird princess instantly sensed an inexorable power. This was the power of karma. The power of darkness had fused together with the curse of karma, and the spear would definitely strike its target before plunging them into eternal darkness. When had this karma connection been established? This was way too terrifying. The vermilion bird princess' heart jolted with shock, and she immediately turned around to conjure up a series of glowing crystal shields. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there were at least 10,000 layers of crystal shields materialized. The black spear crashed into the crystal shields, and it was like a chaotic beast with its gargantuan mouth devouring the crystal shields in a frenzy. One crystal shield after another was quickly melted and engulfed, leaving behind a massive hole. The vermilion bird princess' eyes widened as she unleashed all of her power to unleash a spell technique. However, the power of the black spear had far exceeded her imagination. It was like a divine spear that could pierce through anything, and once it was hurled, its target's fate would be sealed. The vermilion bird princess looked deeply into Enlin's eyes, and there were tears shimmering in her eyes, as if to say, "I'm even willing to give up my life for you." Enlin was also feeling extremely guilty, and he was just about to say something when he discovered that he had been tossed away by the vermilion bird princess, and Su Xiaolan had also been tossed away. A heroic expression appeared on the vermilion bird princess' face as she quickly flew away from Enlin and Su Xiaolan. The black spear was simply too powerful, and she didn't want Enlin and Su Xiaolan to be by her side in case they were caught in the crossfire. Vermilion bird princess. Enlin couldn't help but burst into tears at the sight of the vermilion bird princess' selfless expression, and he yelled in a panicked voice. Scenes from the past began to surface in his mind. The two of them had become friends after their battle at the Sun Tree Arena. He had given the title of Sun Tree War God to the vermilion bird princess, whom he thought had died in battle. He had accidentally reunited with the vermilion bird princess on the 7th level. The vermilion bird princess had created an opportunity for him to meet Ely, and they had gone through thick and thin together in the mythological B-Sex 5-colored lightning pit. The vermilion bird princess had always been an honest and considerate person. Even Su Xiaolan couldn't help but feel tears welling up in her eyes. Just from this gesture alone, she felt like the vermilion bird princess was a very good girl. And Lin and Su Xiaolan tumbled to the ground, and the vermilion bird princess flew into the sky. The black spear then began to change directions. It plunged toward the ground. Vermilion bird princess. Lin. Su Xiaolan drew a sharp intake of breath. That's right, the black spear was hurtling toward Lin. This scene caused everyone to be stunned. They finally understood what was going on. Karma was connected, but it wasn't with the vermilion bird princess. It was with Lin. The vermilion bird princess came to a sudden realization. She had never interacted with heavenly goddess Lin Yu before, so how could she have given the black spear to her? This didn't make any sense. As for Lin, he was feeling extremely traumatized. He roared with tears streaming down his face. "How much do you hate me? I'm asking you, how much do you hate me?" All of the mighty figures had joined forces to deal with heavenly goddess Lin Yu, but she was still beating up a cripple. Now, the vermilion bird princess was fleeing with him, but heavenly goddess Lin Yu was still ignoring the vermilion bird princess and attacking Lin. What kind of blood feud was this? No one answered Lin's roar. The only response he received was heavenly goddess Lin Yu's cold and emotionless expression, as well as the fearsome might of the black spear. Chapter 1560. And Lin knew that he wouldn't be able to evade this time. His energy had been completely depleted, and he couldn't even roll around on the ground. What else could he do to evade this lethal strike? Furthermore, the black spear was imbued with heavenly goddess Lin Yu's powerful power of karma, so it wouldn't stop until it struck Lin. It was like the most terrifying homing missile in this world, and no matter how much an opponent he was, it would still be able to follow him until his A*S exploded. Was there any way for him to defend himself against this attack without using any abilities? In moments of life and death, some people's minds would go completely blank, and they would instantly fall into a daze. However, others would think countless times faster in response to their powerful survival instincts. Vermilion Bird Mirror? No, it had already been shattered. If he tried to defend himself against this attack, the mirror might shatter and he would die. Chaotic Alloy Brick? The most black and hardest under the heavens? A thought flashed through Lin's mind, and he immediately pulled out the inky black brick before expanding it. At this moment, the black spear had already fallen like a bolt of lightning. Boom! The black spear pierced through the inky black brick in a frenzy. The true will of eternal darkness made the spear of darkness shine even more terrifyingly. It was even sharper than all god artifacts. However, an extremely powerful spear let loose an extremely blood-curdling wail as it pierced through the black brick, as if it had encountered some kind of unsolvable conundrum. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The sound of crackling electricity erupted. The black spear pierced through the brick over and over again. The black brick remained completely unmoved, and its smooth, black surface appeared to be quite plain and simple. The earth caved in violently, and Lin also threw up a mouthful of blood from the immense pressure emanating from the black brick. The internal injuries that he had just recovered from using an immortal pill were instantly shattered again. Boom, boom, boom. The earth caved in again and again, and it cracked open again and again. And Lin had completely lost all feeling in his body, and if it weren't for the fact that he was forcing himself to hold his breath and constantly reminding himself to remain conscious, he would have already fainted. After crashing through the black spear over and over again, a crisp crack finally erupted. The tip of the spear was snapped off right before everyone's astonished eyes, and it flew into the air. The black spear also seemed to lose its support and began to dissipate. Holy F***, he blocked it? The Vermilion Bird Princess' eyes widened with shock. After all, this was a dark spear that contained the power of cause and effect. If it didn't hit its target, it would chase after it forever. How could it be bent by an unassuming brick? And Lin, Su Xiaolan was sent flying hundreds of meters away by the aftermath of the shock. She looked anxiously at Lin in the distance. I'm fine. And Lin put away the chaotic alloy brick and replied loudly, reassuring Su Xiaolan. Will you be fine? A cold and emotionless voice rang out, and Lin lay on the ground. He tilted his head and saw the woman who had moved to his side at some point. Hiss! This teleportation, which was like a scene from a horror movie, made him involuntarily suck in a cold breath. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's snowy white, flawless skin was now riddled with black lines, completely ruining her beauty. These black lines were glowing with a peculiar light, and they resonated with the black divine halo above her head. She stared at Lin with her abyssal eyes, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She was like a ferocious beast that had finally cornered its prey, and a cruel yet elated smile appeared on her face. And Lin silently pulled out the massive black brick from his storage ring again. Heavenly Goddess Lin, you looked down at the trembling Lin, and she snatched the brick away before tossing it several dozen kilometers away with a smile. Hee. And Lin, how much? Let me ask you, how deep is the hatred? You're not even going to leave me a brick? At least give me a sense of security before I die. It's all over now. This is what you get for not being friends with me. A hint of melancholy appeared on Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's emotionless face. She materialized her black long sword again, and the true intent of eternal darkness began to surge forth. This was a paramount will that reduced everything to darkness. In that instant, Lin was struck by a profound sense of the laws of darkness. Perhaps it was because he was so close to death, but he was struck by a very peculiar feeling, as if the power of darkness before him was traceable. The extreme of nothingness was the state of being. The extreme of being was the state of nothingness. Objects of extreme mass and density could become black holes that engulfed everything. Within the void and chaos of eternal darkness, a universe with boundless mass could also be born, and Lin didn't know why these thoughts were welling up in his heart. In the final second of his life, he wasn't thinking about Xiaolan. Instead, he was thinking about the Big Bang. Am I stupid C*** and T? And Lin thought to himself with a grief-stricken expression, Die. As long as you die, you'll be with us forever. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu murmured to herself as she gripped her black longsword with both hands and raised it high above her head. Bam! There was another shattering sound. The divine halo above Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's head exploded. The divine halo, which had been glowing with a divine light a moment ago, exploded into specks of light that disappeared into thin air. The black longsword also crumbled into nothingness. And Lin was dumbstruck. The people who had chased after him had also turned from panic and nervousness into astonishment. All of the black veined patterns on Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's body receded like a receding tide, revealing her snowy white, delicate body. Her footsteps were light and frail, and she was like a willow twig that was swaying on its own despite the absence of any wind. Her eyes became golden again, but this was an extremely dim golden color, as if they were gems without any luster or luster. They were dull and devoid of any vitality. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu faltered momentarily before looking around with confusion in her eyes. A wry smile appeared on her face as she looked up at the faint red sky, then at the collapsed Lin, upon which a wry smile appeared on her face. So I failed after all? PFFF. She couldn't help but throw up a mouthful of black blood. Lin was a little surprised to see this. Wasn't all heavenly human tribe blood pure white? However, that wasn't important anymore. He was very elated at this moment. At the final moment of the battle, Lin Yu was finally unable to hold on. He knew that Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had to pay an extremely heavy price to unleash her ninth divine halo. The heavenly Tao would inflict backlash upon the heavenly human tribe, and this backlash would definitely be extremely terrifying. Otherwise, Heavenly God Jordan wouldn't have been forced into such a dire situation. I've won this battle. A triumphant smile appeared on Lin's face as he lay on the ground. Lin was no longer as domineering and vicious as before. She was like a helpless little girl as she looked around before squatting down and picking up a large rock with great difficulty. Lin Yu smiled at Lin before raising the rock and hurling it toward Lin's face. Chapter 1561. Lin was completely dumbstruck. There were only two words in his mind. Holy F***CK. Never would he have thought that Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu would be able to pick up a massive rock from the ground and hurl it toward his face, even though she was completely powerless. How much did she hate him? How much did she hate him? Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had unleashed all of her power, and her tall and slender body was also falling toward Lin, as if she were trying to transfer all of her weight onto the rock. And Lin looked at the rock that was growing larger and larger, and an expression of despair appeared on his face. Could it be that he, the mighty heavenly court war god, who had lived his entire life, was going to die under an ordinary rock instead of the fearsome power of the divine halo? The Vermilion Bird Princess immediately flicked a finger upon seeing this, and a powerful force pierced through space to pulverize the falling rock. However, Lin Yu's body was still hurtled toward Lin due to inertia. Thump! Ow! And Lin let loose a pained cry as Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu crashed into his chest. Thus, Lin Yu fell into Lin's arms, and her forehead bumped into Lin's chin. And Lin could feel the soft sensation on his body, as well as the warmth emanating from her body. He saw Lin Yu raise her head and stare at him with a pair of dimming eyes. The two of them were inches apart, and Lin could clearly see the dust and bloodstains on Lin Yu's exquisitely beautiful face. He was in a panic. At such a close distance, Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was going to do whatever she wanted to him. However, he didn't have the strength to resist in his current state. Lin Yu's cherry lips parted slightly, and then Lin could even detect a faint fragrance wafting from her lips. A soft and melancholy voice sounded. When you stare into the abyss ignores you. Lin Yu looked at Lin and pressed her hands against his chest as she spoke in a gentle voice. And Lin's lips twitched slightly. What was that supposed to mean? Why was it different from what he had imagined? Was Lin Yu crazy? Lin Yu smiled gently and asked, "And Lin, are you willing to be friends with me?" And Lin was dumbstruck once again. What was the point of asking this question now? However, when he thought about how he was currently being pressed down by Lin Yu and was completely powerless, he absolutely couldn't anger her. Thus, he nodded slightly and said, "I'm willing." Hearing this, Lin Yu was stunned. Her dim eyes suddenly became misty, and she sobbed softly, That's great. We're still friends in the end. I wanted to kill you and then follow you. I didn't expect that we would still be alive and become friends." Lin Yu raised her flawless, jade-like face and smiled. In the dusk, her smile was especially bright. "And Lin, I await you in death and eternal darkness." Her voice was like a gentle breeze. And Lin fell into a daze at the sight of this dazzling smile. He then felt the weight weighing down on his body slowly lighten. The woman before him gradually transformed into specks of white light before disappearing between heaven and earth. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was no longer between heaven and earth. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was dead. No one doubted this. Regardless of whether it was the celestial arch, white spirit snake, black spirit snake, or the phoenix, or even Su Xiaolan and Xin Yuan Cheng, all of them heaved heavy sighs of relief. And Lin lay silently on the ground with a confused expression on his face. There was something wrong with Lin Yu's words before she died. It felt weird. Await me in death and eternal darkness? Was she cursing me to die? And Lin's heart was filled with confusion, but he didn't know who to ask. And Lin, the vermilion bird princess, descended from the sky and cradled Lin in her arms. "Are you all right?" And Lin heaved a forlorn sigh. "Aside from the fact that my energy is completely depleted, my bones and muscles are all broken, and my consciousness almost left my body, I'm fine." The Vermilion Bird Princess. The Vermilion Bird Princess fed an immortal pill to Lin with a pained expression before carrying Lin over to Su Xiaolan and cradling the immobile Su Xiaolan in her arms as well. I feel like it's a little troublesome to carry him like this." The Vermilion Bird Princess had Xiaolan in her left arm and Lin in her right, and she looked as if she had reached the pinnacle of her life, but there was a resigned expression on her face. She looked around at the battlefield and discovered a red blood soul jade coffin in the distance, upon which her eyes lit up. Boom, boom. And Lin and Su Xiaolan were tossed into the coffin at the same time. The lid of the coffin was then slammed back down. The Vermilion Bird Princess used a spell technique to glue the lid of the coffin back together before dusting off her hands with a smile. The Blood Soul Jade coffin has regenerative properties and can also protect you. It's just that the coffin lid has been sliced in half, so I've used a spell technique to patch it up. And Lin and Su Xiaolan stared speechlessly at the smug Vermilion Bird Princess. The Vermilion Bird Princess clapped her hands together before carrying the coffin on her back. "I'll protect you this time." And Lin thought back to when he was carrying Xiaolan around in the coffin. Now, it was the Vermilion Bird Princess who was carrying him and Xiaolan around in the coffin. This strange development made him feel like life was a wonderful place. If he had been the slightest bit careless, he would have ended up in the same coffin as his wife. And Lin and Su Xiaolan squeezed into the same coffin, feeling each other's body heat. They looked into each other's eyes, and both of them couldn't help but burst into laughter. "It feels a little weird." Su Xiaolan's eyes crinkled into crescents as a warm smile appeared on her face. And Lin was also quite amused. "We weren't born on the same day, month, and year, but we're going to die on the same day, month, and year. That way, we'll be going down to the grave together." Su Xiaolan patted Lin's chest with a displeased expression. "Don't say that. We still have countless years to live." and Lin couldn't help but plant a light peck on the tip of her nose as he looked at the enraged beauty. "You? Can't you behave yourself in a coffin?" A faint blush appeared on Su Xiaolan's face, and she was extremely shy. The domineering aura of the divine phoenix maiden was nowhere to be seen, and Lin chuckled as a sense of bliss welled up in his heart. There was a familiar person beside him, a familiar fragrance, and a familiar warmth. After surviving that ordeal, he would cherish the warmth around him even more. However, the Vermilion Bird Princess was quite displeased. "Say, can you two patients stop flirting with each other? Can you at least consider my feelings? I finally understand why Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu hates you so much." Oof. Su Xiaolan was feeling a little awkward. However, Lin didn't seem to mind in the slightest. On the other side of the battlefield, the Celestial Arch, Black Spirit Snake, and White Spirit Snake were all trying to stop Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu with all their might. Heavenly God Jordan was able to catch his breath and quickly recover from his injuries. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu's sacrifice created a very good opportunity for Heavenly God Jordan to retaliate. He basked in a green divine light and looked down at the vast earth below. "Lin Yu, let me avenge you." Chapter 1562. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu had already perished. The Celestial Arch, Black Spirit Snake, White Spirit Snake, and the Phoenix all had their attention focused on Heavenly God Jordan. They could see that Heavenly God Jordan was taking this opportunity to recover his power, and one earth-shattering spell technique after another fell from the sky, each of which was imbued with the power to destroy heaven and earth. Jordan's pure golden eyes gradually turned black. Everyone's hearts jolted upon seeing this. They knew that he was about to unleash his 9th divine halo. Just how terrifying was a heavenly god with 9 divine halos? That battle between Lin and Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu was a perfect example of that. Even with the powers of the heavenly gods, they would still find it very difficult to resist. It could be said that if they didn't handle this properly, they could all be wiped out. We can't let him unleash the power of his divine halo. Hurry up and stop him with everything we have. The Celestial, the Arch, and Black Spirit Snake yelled in unison. Heavenly God Jordan remained expressionless as he spoke in an indifferent voice. The 9th Black Divine Halo is known as the Fallen Heavenly God. It's not that the Divine Halo will lead the Heavenly God to fall, but rather that the Heavenly God is unable to withstand this power and will fall as a result. The Black Barrier created an absolute defense that kept the combined attacks of the Celestial Arch and the others at bay. Jordan raised his inky black abyssal eyes. How ironic. The Black Divine Halo is a power that we are supposed to possess, but it's being restricted by this world. Countless terrifying spell techniques exploded outside the barrier. The barrier, which was imbued with the power of the laws of the heavenly Tao, was beginning to crack open. Heaven-crushing techniques had a special suppressive effect against heavenly gods. However, it was still too slow. A black divine halo was already gradually materializing above heavenly god Jordan's head. The Celestial Arch and the others knew that things were not looking good, but there was nothing they could do. Right at this moment, the earth around heavenly god Jordan suddenly bulged, and an earthy humanoid living being suddenly emerged before shattering the divine halo above heavenly god Jordan's head with a single slap. Bam! The black divine halo disintegrated into countless particles of light before it had even fully materialized. Heavenly God Jordan's eyes turned golden again, and he stared at the living being that had suddenly appeared before him with astonishment on his face. The earthen yellow creature had a distinct face, as if it had been carved by a knife. He was completely naked and had no gender. There were coarse lines on his skin, which were simple yet contained the great Tao. Anyone who looked at him will be mesmerized. There was also a sense of vicissitudes. Most importantly, there was an earthen yellow divine ring above its head. It constantly revolved and emitted a unique aura, as if it was the only sovereign in the world. Jordan, you've done enough. There's no need to sacrifice yourself anymore. The living being's voice was extremely powerful, and every single word seemed to strike at Jordan's heart. Heavenly God Jordan looked at the living being before him, and he was initially astonished beyond words before a respectful expression appeared on his face. As you wish, Heavenly Mountain God. Heavenly Mountain God? The Celestial, the Arch, and the others, as well as Lin and Su Xiaolan lying in their coffins, were all given a fright. The Heavenly Mountain God, the embodiment of the Heavenly Tao, heavenly gods that didn't have ordinary names and were named after unique elements, were all representatives of the Heavenly Tao. They represented the paramount powers of the Heavenly Tao, and each and every one of them possessed unimaginable power. The vermilion bird princess body trembled with fear, and she almost abandoned the coffin and ran away. Holy Mother of God, I don't want to offend the heavens. I still want to live for another 500 million years. We're already on the same boat, so don't think too much and face reality. And Lin offered words of consolation. Boom! The barrier that Heavenly God Jordan had set up exploded. Countless spell techniques rained down upon Heavenly God Jordan and the Heavenly Mountain God. The Heavenly Mountain God materialized a mundane-looking wooden staff out of thin air before knocking it against the ground. An earthen yellow film of light instantly enshrouded the two of them. In that instant, everyone felt as if they were looking at a divine mountain with no end in sight, and they were struck by an instinctive sense of how insignificant they were. Boom, boom, boom. Spell techniques exploded, and destructive power erupted forth. After the energy dissipated, everyone was greeted by the sight of Heavenly God Jordan and the Heavenly Mountain God standing on the ground, completely unscathed. The earthen yellow film of light was still glowing with a boundless divine light. One had to realize that this was an attack unleashed by three super mighty figures at the Tao integration pinnacle stage. They couldn't even break through their barrier. The Heavenly Mountain God was not smug. Instead, it turned toward the vermilion bird princess and shook its head with a forlorn expression. It's a pity about Lin Yu. I had thought that she would be able to kill Lin with her 8 divine halos, but who would have thought that she would still fall short even after using her 9 divine halos? It heaved a forlorn sigh as it spoke. This was an unintentional remark, but it was like a bolt from the blue to everyone else. It had immediately expressed its disappointment that Lin had not been killed. From this, one could imagine just how important Lin was to the Heavenly Mountain God. Lin almost jumped out of his coffin upon hearing this. He wanted to ask the Heavenly Mountain God what kind of vendetta it had against him. What kind of vendetta did it have against him? For a split second, he felt like he was the main character. He was lying in a coffin, but there was still a boss that wanted to kill him. What the hell was going on? I won't let you hurt Lin. The celestial thearch's expression was filled with determination. Lin was extremely touched. The celestial thearch was actively drawing enemies to him. If you want to hurt Senior Lin, then you'll have to do it over my dead body. White Spirit Snake's battle intent was already surging, and she refused to back down in the slightest. Lin wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Was White Spirit Snake being so nice to him? Black Spirit Snake hesitated momentarily before speaking in a cold voice. If you want to step over little Bai's dead body, then you'll have to do it over mine first. That was a very subtle way of putting it. The phoenix also refused to back down, and it let loose an enraged cry. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Everyone chose to stand on the same side as Lin, and they were going to fight with their lives on the line. Lin was extremely touched by this, and he wanted nothing more than to jump out of his coffin and fight alongside his friends. The Heavenly Mountain God shook its head slowly. No, I'm not the one who's going to kill Lin, so why are you all standing in my way? As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's expressions turned cold. The Vermilion Bird Princess seemed to have detected something, as she immediately spread open her wings with her red high heels on her back before flying into the distance at her maximum speed. The ground in front of her suddenly exploded. A tall and slender woman with a head of sharp black hair and a black divine halo above her head suddenly appeared. She chuckled lightly, and her body glowed with a black metallic sheen as a dangerous light flashed in her crimson eyes. You're already at the southern heavenly gate, and you still want to leave? I'm waiting for you to become useless, Lin. You can all pay for what you did to Lin Yu with your lives. A supreme aura that contained an unparalleled will suddenly spread out. The Vermilion Bird Princess was given a massive fright, and Lin was astonished. Another enemy with the power of the heavenly gods. Chapter 1563. The woman's entire body was completely black, and her white teeth were revealed when she smiled, creating quite a harrowing sight to behold. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the heavenly metal god, the god that is going to take your life. And Lin, no matter how powerful you are or how many trump cards you have, you won't be able to do anything in your current state. The heavenly metal god wore a calm and confident smile on her face. Everyone finally understood why the two heavenly gods had taken so long to enter the battlefield. They were also wary of Enlin and were afraid that Enlin would target them if they entered the battlefield too early. Enlin had already been listed as an extremely dangerous being in the eyes of the representatives of the heavenly Tao. They didn't know whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. Logically speaking, the fact that he was being taken seriously by the enemies meant that he was extremely powerful, so they should be happy. However, Enlin was not happy. The representatives of the heavenly Tao were taking him so seriously. So how was he going to play the fool and catch them off guard in the future? The enemies were going to send him the most powerful cannons and the most ferocious chicks. How was he going to win? Enlin suddenly felt like life was so difficult. Everything had already been arranged by the enemies. Heavenly Goddess Lin Yu and Heavenly God Jordan were already enough to force them into a corner. Now that Enlin and Su Xiaolan were completely disabled, how were they supposed to fight the Heavenly Mountain God and Heavenly Metal God? They might not be able to win even if they were to give up their lives. The Heavenly Metal God paid no heed to Enlin's complex emotions as she rushed toward the Vermilion Bird Princess. She gripped the air with one hand, upon which a golden sword made of an indistinguishable material appeared in her hand. A representative of the Heavenly Tao was extremely powerful, and even though the Vermilion Bird Princess had focused all of her attention on the Heavenly Metal God, she was still unable to keep up with her speed. Whoosh! A sword projection flashed. The Vermilion Bird Princess evaded with extreme speed, but her waist was still struck. Her dress was sliced open, and blood gushed forth from her slender waist. She gritted her teeth, and her red high heels stomped the ground, leaving a red streak of light in her wake. There were still a few crimson butterflies fluttering in her wake to disrupt her enemy's movements. He. Space interference and illusion. A joyful smile appeared on the Heavenly Metal God's face as she quickly caught up to the fleeing Vermilion Bird Princess. She slashed the golden sword in her right hand through the air, eliminating all obstacles in her way. At the same time, a white metal whip instantly condensed in her left hand. Like a lightning snake, it pierced towards the coffin on her back. Bang! There was an earth-shattering explosion. The lid of the coffin, which was made of celestial artifact material, was broken again, and a hole was pierced by the tip of the metal whip. And Lin looked at the tip of the metal whip that was only a few centimeters away from his head and had almost pierced through it. He could not help but break into a cold sweat. All right, that's enough playing around. Let's end this as soon as possible, the Heavenly Mountain God said in an indifferent voice. All right. An elated smile appeared on the Heavenly Metal God's face, and the metal whip in her hand wriggled like a spirit snake again as she tried to widen the hole in the coffin before stabbing Enlin to death. Enlin looked at the tip of the metal whip that kept twisting in front of him. He couldn't help but shout, "Help! Even the heavenly gods have come out. How long are you guys going to hide?" Rumble. Lightning pierced through heaven and earth, and an earth-shattering boom erupted. After the blinding lightning dissipated, 3 figures appeared in the sky. A crimson bolt of lightning crashed down toward the Heavenly Metal God at an incredible speed. The Heavenly Metal God immediately retreated before unleashing a sword strike at the same time. Bam! A violent collision ensued, accompanied by extremely dazzling energy. And Lin caught sight of a valiant figure, as if he were a peerless hero who had descended from the heavens. Her evil dragon emperor robe danced in the wind, and her hand transformed into a black dragon claw that clamped down on the heavenly metal god's golden sword. Her 5 claws transformed into a dragon, and the roar of a true dragon suddenly erupted, making even the heavens tremor. The dragon's roar was imbued with extremely terrifying heaven-crushing intent, and it instantly reduced the ground within a radius of 5 kilometers to dust. The heavenly metal god reacted extremely quickly, and she instantly materialized a white metal bracelet to keep the dragon's roar at bay. A shockwave swept past, but the metal bracelet was still cracked open. The 4th heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, the ancient Dragon Empress. The heavenly metal god's expression shifted. The ancient Dragon Empress was vastly renowned across the entire Taichu continent. After all, she had slain the heavenly speed god in person, so normal heavenly gods didn't dare to get complacent in her presence. And Lin heaved a long sigh of relief upon seeing the ancient Dragon Empress. He had been hiding his trump card all this time in order to deal with these heavenly gods. The ancient Dragon Empress was a woman of few words. She didn't say anything, and her other hand passed through the heavenly metal god's sword before grabbing toward the heavenly metal god's face. The heavenly metal god immediately retreated upon seeing this, and she swung her metal whip through the air in an extremely agile manner before stabbing it toward the ancient Dragon Empress' back. The ancient Dragon Empress continued onward, and a dark yellow divine Tao light erupted from her body. A massive millstone enshrouded her tall and slender body, and it rotated relentlessly, pulverizing all things, as if even the sky were going to be pulverized at this moment. Heaven-crushing millstone. The metal whip struck the millstone and was instantly pulverized hundreds of thousands of times, and even the tip of the whip had been ground flat. As expected of the ancient Dragon Empress, a joyful smile appeared on the heavenly metal god's face. The ancient Dragon Empress was not happy at all at the sight of the heavenly metal god's elated smile. Instead, tears of blood began to flow from her eyes, and Lin suddenly became excited. Back then, he and Su Xiaolan had been traumatized by the ancient Dragon Empress tear-shedding technique. Even a return to void final stage mighty figure would self-detonate in less than a second after being struck by that technique. The ancient Dragon Empress was now at the Tao integration stage, and she was the 4th heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect. Even Lin didn't dare to imagine just how terrifying her tears of blood were. Heaven-crushing slaughter. The woman let loose a clear cry, and a peculiar red power of the divine Tao instantly enshrouded the entire space. The heavenly metal god was struck by an extremely powerful sense of peril in that instant, a sense of slaughter and destruction that reached straight to the very essence of the ancient Dragon Empress, was ravaged by a frenzy of destruction. Even though her body was made up of the most resolute metal, it was still able to disintegrate particles. She let loose a cry of surprise as over 100 golden swords imbued with absolute sharpness materialized before her, which she used to stab toward the ancient Dragon Empress. However, the ancient Dragon Empress charged straight into the sword formation like a fearless warrior before unleashing a fist toward the heavenly metal god's face. In a battle between powerful beings, a split second was all that mattered. As expected of a super mighty figure who was most proficient in slaughter, the ancient Dragon Empress was only able to create opportunities by not fearing death. She managed to land her fist on the heavenly metal god's face before the heavenly metal god had a chance to activate her sword formation. The heavenly metal god's face was completely deformed by her fist. Boom! An earth-shattering boom erupted. The heavenly metal god, who had just been laughing heartily in battle, was knocked flying for over 50 kilometers by the ancient Dragon Empress. Chapter 1564. Heavenly God Jordan was astonished to see the heavenly metal god being knocked flying by a single punch. The celestial arch, black spirit snake, and the others also clicked their tongues upon seeing this. This ancient Dragon Empress was no ordinary badass. Only the heavenly disciples of the heaven-crushing sect were capable of bashing the most revered heavenly gods in such an unreasonable manner. The heavenly mountain god raised an eyebrow as it turned toward another direction. A handsome young man in a coarse linen robe made his way over to it with his bare feet. Every step he took made contact with the ground, but not a speck of dust could be seen. It was as if he was in the mortal world, yet he had left it and reached a higher dimension. The second heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, Chun. Jordan's expression shifted again. He was astonished by the ancient dragon empress appearance. However, Chun's appearance was nothing short of astonishing. The heavenly time god was the most powerful heavenly god below the 6 paramount heavenly gods. However, it had fallen 100 years ago, and its power had reverted to the unconscious heavenly Tao. Heavenly God Jordan knew that the heavenly time god had fallen not because of Enlin, but because of the second heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect, Chun. Chun was the one who had forced it to self-detonate. The heavenly gods were very cautious and didn't want to reveal themselves, as they were wary of the heavenly disciples of the heaven-crushing sect. Now, the second heavenly disciple of the heaven-crushing sect really had appeared here, and he seemed to be waiting for them to show themselves. "Are you finally going to attack?" What a surprise. The heavenly mountain god stared coldly at the oncoming youth, and the might of the divine halo above its head soared explosively as Boundless might crash down upon it like a mountain. Chun continued onward as if he didn't exist. Looks like the heavenly gods are very nervous. The void body mantra really is a good thing. Even the heavenly gods are unable to detect its presence. A smile appeared on the celestial Thearch's face as he looked at the approaching Chun. Chun's void body mantra could even isolate the power of the heavenly time god's self-detonation. It wasn't all that surprising that he had managed to fool these 2 heavenly gods. The final trump card of the extermination team had finally made all of the heavenly gods quite nervous. The crushing situation, which was originally within their grasp, was reversed once again. Heavenly God Jordan, the heavenly mountain god, and the heavenly metal god discovered that they were the ones being hunted. The extermination team's final trump card had arrived. The Celestial Arch was overjoyed. However, Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake were given a fright before their eyes blazed with rage. Black Spirit Snake turned toward the Celestial Arch with shock and rage. "Why are the heaven-crushing sect members here? You know about the Sky Emperor, right? You're the second in command of the heaven-mending sect, yet you're cooperating with the heaven-crushing sect's heavenly disciple?" The Celestial Arch blinked with an innocent expression. "No, I didn't. Don't spout nonsense. I'm working with the sect leader of the 4-9 Immortal sect, Enlin. However, Chun of the heaven-crushing sect just so happened to be working with Enlin. We just happened to be together." Black Spirit Snake almost threw up a mouthful of blood upon hearing the Celestial Thearch's explanation. What F** King happened to be together? Was he trying to fool an idiot? White Spirit Snake nodded with enlightened expression. "No wonder Her Majesty told us not to do anything rash and to prioritize destroying the heavenly human tribe first when we reported the southern heavenly gate to Her Majesty. She's afraid that we'll fight the heaven-crushing sect?" The heavenly mountain god's aura became more and more terrifying, as if it were a boundless Mount Bujo that had been born from the chaos of the universe. It crashed down toward Chun with boundless mountainous power. Ordinary almighties would be crushed into a puddle of blood the moment they came into contact with this pressure. They wouldn't even have the chance to resist. However, Chun only patted his shoulder as if he had dusted it off before continuing to make his way toward the heavenly mountain god with a smile on his face. In reality, his battle with the heavenly mountain god had already commenced. Elsewhere on the battlefield, the heavenly metal god stood up and withdrew all of her previous condescension. There was still a deep fist imprint on her cheek, and her face was completely devoid of any elasticity, creating a very peculiar sight to behold. However, she didn't mind. She gripped the air with one hand as she looked at the oncoming ancient dragon empress. Countless golden pieces of metal spun rapidly through the air like saw teeth. Not only were they extremely hard, but they were also imbued with the power to slice through all things. The ancient dragon empress fist crashed into the golden pieces of metal, and the countless pieces of metal were able to withstand her devastating attack. Not only that, but they were also able to inflict a series of extremely deep gashes on the ancient dragon empress fist. The ancient dragon empress eyelids twitched, and she quickly retreated. This is chaotic, immortal metal, the sharpest metal in the universe. There's no way you can shatter it. The heavenly metal god finally regained some of her confidence. She stood proudly amid the countless pieces of chaotic, immortal metal. In this world, I can use any type of metal, and I can unleash its properties to the fullest extent. I am the goddess of all metals. The ancient dragon empress remained silent, and she shook her throbbing hand before pouncing toward the heavenly metal god again. The vermilion bird princess heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing that the three heavenly gods had all been held back. At this time, there was another wave of extremely beautiful fragrance that refreshed the mind. She raised her head to discover an extremely beautiful woman descending from the sky. She had a pair of clear blue eyes, a sharp nose, and thin, yet extremely beautiful lips. Her features were like the most perfect artwork. What was most eye-catching were her 6 pristine, flawless wings, which glowed with a holy and healing light as they spread open. There were also countless white feathers falling from the sky, creating a beautiful, holy, and alluring spectacle. Rafaela. The vermilion bird princess immediately identified the newcomer. Rafaela was one of the 4 archangels of the Garden of Eden. She was the #1 superstar on the Tai Chu continent, who had attracted countless fans through her beauty alone. Furthermore, she possessed Tao integration stage power and an extremely healing smile, so she was revered as the #1 goddess on the Tai Chu continent by many living beings. "I'm here to treat Enlin and Su Xiaolan," Rafaela said with a gentle smile. Enlin was indescribably excited at the sight of Rafaela. Rafaela fulfilled all of his fantasies about angels. She was beautiful, gentle, and could even heal people in times of need. Rafaela carefully carried Enlin and Su Xiaolan out of the cave with an extremely beautiful and comforting smile on her face. "Thank you for your hard work in that battle. Even I couldn't help but cheer for you when I was watching from afar." Enlin was very pleased to hear this. "Look at those words. What sweet mouth. Your performance has even exceeded the expectations of the 2 heavenly disciples, and it's exactly because of your astonishing power that our plan was able to be executed to perfection." Rafaela continued to praise them with genuine emotions on her beautiful face. Her eyes were fixed on Enlin's body with reverence and a hint of curiosity. Enlin was feeling a little smug after being praised and even worshipped by the #1 goddess of the Tai Chu continent. Su Xiaolan silently pinched Enlin's waist. Enlin immediately looked straight ahead. Chapter 1565. A smile appeared on Rafaela's face as she looked on with amusement. However, she also turned her attention away from Enlin and focused on setting up a regenerative spell formation. The regenerative spell formation was activated. An enormous amount of healing power flowed into Enlin and Su Xiaolan's bodies. Enlin could feel a very warm power slowly flowing into his body from the surface of his skin. It was as soft and supple as a spring breeze, but it was also filled with boundless vitality. It was like a lover's hand gently caressing his entire body. Regardless of whether it was his injured organs, broken meridians, broken bones, or even his feeble consciousness, all of them were being nurtured and healed. Enlin was even moaning in comfort. All of his exhaustion and pain had disappeared, and his entire body was relaxed and limp. He really wanted to take a good nap. He had tried using immortal tools, immortal pills, and all types of healing spell techniques to heal his injuries, but none of them were as comfortable as they were right now. Furthermore, this was the fastest healing spell technique he had ever used. Even the evergreen technique seemed to resonate with this healing power, thereby significantly enhancing its power. Is this the power of the healing divine Tao? It's so powerful. A blush appeared on Su Xiaolan's face as an expression of enjoyment appeared on her face. She felt as if the after effects of overexerting her body from using the buff mystic technique were greatly alleviated. Cultivators who specialized in healing were extremely rare. There were only a handful of cultivators who had attained the power of the divine Tao through healing in the entire Tai Chu continent. Furthermore, Archangel Raphael was the only cultivator on the entire Tai Chu continent who had successfully attained the Tao integration stage through healing and resonated with heaven and earth. And Lin and Su Xiaolan were currently being treated by the best doctors on the entire Tai Chu continent. Was it very painful to be hospitalized and receive treatment? Raphaela was going to show them what enjoyment was. And Lin looked at the beautiful woman standing at the edge of the spell formation with her eyes tightly closed and her 6 wings spread open. A cool breeze suddenly blew past, revealing a pair of slender and well-proportioned snow-white legs under the angel robe. Her golden hair stirred up the brilliance of the setting sun. She stood alone in the world just like that, tranquil and elegant while divine radiance curled up in spirals. She was beautiful to the point she was like a painting too pleasing to the eyes. She was super beautiful, the treatment was superb, and the process was especially comfortable. For a split second, Lin was even struck by the urge to slash himself with his sword before asking Archangel Raphael for help in healing him. He was shocked. Why did this idea feel so familiar? That's right. Didn't Dongfang Zhuangshi use this exact method to get in touch with Dongfang Mingjie? It was just that he was mentally happy, while Lin was physically comfortable. Soon, Lin felt that his body could move, and he could even use a portion of his power. One had to realize that his body had been completely emptied by heavenly goddess Lin Yu, as expected of the top healer on the Tai Chu continent. Raphael opened her bright, sapphire eyes to find Lin and Su Xiaolan meditating off to the side. A faint smile appeared on her face, and it was very comforting and warm. A smile could make one feel very relaxed and elated. In particular, this smile was displayed by Raphaela, who could even perform the Tao integration stage with her healing divine Tao. As such, the power of this smile had been amplified countless times. Even Su Xiaolan's heart was throbbing with excitement, let alone Lin. She had never seen such a beautiful smile in her entire life. Raphael was genuinely happy. If Su Xiaolan and Lin could quickly recover from their injuries and return to battle, then their chances of securing victory would increase significantly. She paused for a moment and decided to change her treatment strategy. All of a sudden, a shadow appeared behind her. The heavenly Tao was invisible, and everything in this world was the heavens. Chaos and nothingness were the heavens, and the Tao encompassed everything. The earth was boundless, and any point on it could be a place where the heavens could descend. An extremely terrifying sense of peril welled up in Raphael's heart. As the #1 healer on the Tai Chu continent, she was very familiar with death. It could be said that she had battled with death all this time. At this critical moment, she naturally knew how close she was to death. Run. She had to run. The sense of peril behind her sent chills running down her spine. She was just about to run toward Lin when a sharp pain suddenly shot through her neck. An extremely sharp object sliced through her neck at an incredible speed, piercing through her tender skin, piercing through her scorching flesh, and piercing through her indestructible bones. Raphael was greeted by the sight of a beautiful body falling feebly toward the ground. Its 6 wings were folded, and its feathers were stained red with blood, creating a particularly sinister sight in the crimson sky. More importantly, the body was headless. A hoarse voice escaped from her throat as her blue eyes widened. Her hair seemed to have been grabbed and suspended in midair. Her extremely powerful life force allowed her to retain her consciousness even at this moment. Raphael seemed to have realized something, especially when she saw the shock, horror, and rage on the faces of the 2 people before her. She had been killed when she decided to participate in this battle. She knew that there were bound to be casualties. After all, this was a battle against the entire heavenly human tribe on the southern front. This was the most intense battle in the past few decades, and it was extremely normal for Tao integration stage super mighty figures to fall. However, she didn't think that she would be the first super mighty figure to fall. She was a logistician who was responsible for healing the wounded, and Lin's eyes widened, and his mind went completely blank. Everything that was unfolding before his eyes was a massive blow to his heart. Behind Raphael stood a semi-transparent, dark yellow humanoid creature with a black cloak draped over its body. It held a twisted crimson blade in one hand, and it held Raphael's head in the air with its other hand. Raphael's face was filled with astonishment and confusion, and blood continued to flow from the wound on her head. Drip, drip, drip. Just a moment ago, she had been talking and laughing with a warm smile on her face. Now, her expression had completely congealed, and her eyes had lost their liveliness, as if she were a tattered doll. The dark yellow humanoid creature held Raphael's head in its hand with a wide grin on its face, as if it were holding a very valuable trophy. The crimson sky resonated with the blood flowing from the woman's head, as if it were a symphony of despair. And Lin caught sight of the divine halo above the humanoid creature's head, which was a faint greenish-yellow divine halo that was extremely intimidating. Raphael turned to look at Lin and Su Xiaolan, who had risen to their feet in rage. However, the crimson sky gradually engulfed their bodies. Her vision was filled with a vast expanse of red before falling into eternal darkness, upon which she completely lost consciousness. Chapter 1566. Heaven and earth began to wail with grief. The crimson sky became clear and bright, as if it had been healed. It was already evening, and the night sky was slowly descending with countless stars twinkling in the night sky. Heaven and earth were vast and bleak, and only starlight accompanied them. A sense of grief welled up in the hearts of everyone on the battlefield. This was an instinctive sense of grief evoked by the passing of one's Tao. Heaven and earth mourned the death of a Tao integration stage super mighty figure. Countless specks of white light fell upon the earth, shimmering with a gentle light, as if the stars were falling from the sky. The specks of light were imbued with extremely potent healing power, and all of the living beings present could feel their injuries quickly recovering. Even the grief of heaven and earth caused by the death of a Tao integration stage super mighty figure was diluted by this power. This was Raphaela's final reward, and it was just as gentle and healing as ever. In other words, this was the scene of the death of a super mighty figure that was the least saddening to all living beings. And Lin could even see a beautiful and gentle big sister in the sky, cheering him on from afar with a warm smile on her face. Even though the big sister was about to leave him forever, the beauty of this moment struck him with an incomparable sense of warmth and serenity. And Lin and Su Xiaolan had been severely wounded to begin with, so they received the greatest reward. Not only were their injuries quickly recovering, but even their energy was gradually being replenished. Raphaela is dead. Chun Chen's expressionless face faltered for the first time, and he turned toward Raphaela with shock and pity in his eyes. An enraged roar suddenly erupted into the heavens. A red streak of light pierced through the sky before crashing toward the god behind Raphaela at an extremely terrifying speed. "I'm going to kill you, be *starred." The woman's eyes were crimson, and her killing intent soared into the heavens as the roar of a true dragon instantly shattered the ground within a radius of tens of thousands of meters. Borrowing the speed of falling and tearing through the sky, she lifted her leg and kicked at the deity. The kick was imbued with peerless power, as if it could shatter the heavens with a single stomp. Foot of the heavenly Tao. Bam! The collision of red energy instantly reduced everything within a radius of over 50 kilometers to dust. The ancient dragon empress had unleashed her wrath upon this kick, and its heaven-crushing power was elevated to its very peak. Even the heavenly mountain god and the heavenly metal god were struck by a sense of horror, and Lin and Su Xiaolan were knocked back by the shockwaves. If it weren't for the fact that they had recovered from some of their injuries, they would have most likely been reduced to ashes by the shockwaves from the ancient Dragon Empress battle. The ancient voice seemed to pierce through time and space to reach the hearts of everyone present. Anger can make a living being stronger. This saying is indeed true. The energy dissipated. The black-cloaked humanoid creature's cloak was torn away by a terrifying force, revealing his true appearance. It was a face carved out of jade, a handsome young man's face, and his entire body was in a translucent state, as if his body was made of yellow amber. He held Raphaela's head in one hand and the twisted crimson blade in the other as he positioned himself firmly in front of the ancient Dragon Empress' descending kick. Everyone couldn't help but draw a sharp intake of breath upon seeing this. The ancient Dragon Empress had unleashed the most powerful heaven-crushing techniques and unleashed her wrath attack, but it wasn't even able to force her opponent back. You can crush stars and shatter moons with a single stomp, but do you think you can move even a single inch of this boundless earth? The yellow god smiled. The ancient Dragon Empress didn't say anything, but tears of blood suddenly flowed from her eyes. A red divine, Dao, instantly enshrouded her opponent in an attempt to crush every single part of her opponent's body. However, the yellow god wasn't panicked in the slightest. Instead, it shook its head lightly, as if it was mocking the ancient Dragon Empress for overestimating herself. Right at this moment, the ancient Dragon Empress swept a hand through the air. A crimson light flashed past. Her golden hair was sliced cleanly down the middle. Raphaela's head and body were instantly cradled in the ancient Dragon Empress' arms before she quickly retreated. A faint smile appeared on the yellow god's face. You're about to die, and you still want to protect your comrade's body? You have such an unyielding personality, but I didn't think you'd have such a soft heart. His feet weren't moving, but his body was chasing after the ancient Dragon Empress at an extremely terrifying speed. The twisted crimson blade in his hand became even more sinister. Right at this moment, a bolt of golden void lightning imbued with the power to annihilate all things tore through space. The lightning was imbued with a paramount will, as if it were a god that wielded the power of billions of bolts of lightning, and it was determined to annihilate all things in this world. Boom! Divine lightning exploded, annihilating all things. The young man's body faltered as he slashed his blade toward the golden void lightning. The boundless lightning crashed into the crimson blade, only to be sliced in half. If I had known this would happen, I would have killed that woman sooner. Now, there's one more problem to deal with. The young man waved his crimson blade as he looked at Enlin with an indifferent expression. Enlin's expression darkened. He had unleashed the full power of his heavenly lightning power, but it had been so easily blocked by his opponent. This disparity in power struck him with a sense of unease. Thankfully, Enlin wasn't fighting alone. He still had Xiaolan, and the ancient Dragon Empress had also recovered Raphaela's body before glaring at the divine being with an enraged expression. "Who are you?" Enlin asked the question that had been bothering him the most. A harmless smile appeared on the young man's face as he stared at Enlin with his earthy eyes. "Me? Heaven and earth are black and yellow, and the universe is chaotic and chaotic. There was heaven first, then earth. I am number 2. The young man raised his hands high into the air as he spoke. In that instant, everything between heaven and earth seemed to be resonating with him. Boom, boom, boom. The boundless earth began to tremor violently. It was impossible to describe what kind of power this was. It was as if the entire Tai Chu continent was trembling at his command. The earth cracked open. Mountains rose up. Vast plains appeared. Hills and valleys appeared one after another. A great power that could change the appearance of the continent with just a wave of a hand was appearing before their eyes. They were astonished to the core. That's right. Everything that was happening before their eyes had far exceeded everyone's imagination. Enlin had only seen something like this in the divine mirror world when Tina created the world. The young man slowly lowered his hands, and the earth-shattering transformation came to an abrupt halt as everything returned to normal. However, the earth that had been ravaged by the battle had now been restored to its original state, as if the battle had never taken place. Almost everyone present knew the identity of the deity in front of them. As long as they weren't idiots, they would be able to guess who he was. I am the culmination of the 5 elements, the all-encompassing earth. The young man's voice was ancient and boundless, and he looked at Enlin and the others with a benevolent expression on his face. And all of you are my descendants. All of the living beings present exploded upon hearing this. The enemy was telling them, I'm your father, and asking them if they knew how to explode. Chapter 1567. Of course, everyone couldn't help but draw a sharp intake of breath. The enemy before them was even more terrifying than they had imagined. The Heavenly Earth God. They knew just how important this title was. According to the Heavenly Human Tribe higher-ups, the Heavenly Tao had 6 paramount heavenly gods, which were heaven, earth, ocean, life, light, and darkness. They represented the paramount will of the Heavenly Tao and were also the most fundamental authority of the Heavenly Tao. They also had the right to bestow powers upon other living beings. For example, Lan Xiaoni's power of water had been bestowed upon her by the Heavenly Sea God. The Heavenly Sea God was split into 2 factions. One was the radical faction that wanted to cleanse the entire continent, while the other was the moderate faction that only wanted to cleanse the human race. The moderate faction, led by the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army, was led by the Heavenly Light Goddess. Aside from her, the ocean and earth gods were also the main forces of the moderate faction. Now that one of the 6 paramount heavenly gods, the Heavenly Earth God, had appeared before everyone, how could they remain calm and collected? Enlin's confidence in joining forces with the ancient dragon empress instantly vanished, and he yelled at the youth in the distance, Chun Chun, let's switch opponents. Chun Chun, the youth hesitated momentarily before tossing a ball of white light toward the celestial arch. Your aptitude is no less inferior to mine, but you're just a useless piece of trash in a battle against the heavens. If you want to save everyone's lives, then use it. The celestial arch turned to the celestial arch before arriving beside Enlin in a flash. The celestial arch stared blankly at the ball of light before him. What was this? Why was Chun Chun giving this to him? Even though he didn't know what this was, he could clearly sense the extremely rich heaven-crushing intent emanating from the ball of light. It was quite clear that this ball of light was the essence of the heaven-crushing sect. No, I'm a member of the heaven-mending sect. How could I accept a gift from the heaven-crushing sect? This is clearly an extremely important item of the heaven-crushing sect. The celestial arch knew that if he accepted this item, he would be siding with the heaven-crushing sect. The enemy was trying to use a sugar-coated bullet to corrupt his mind. Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake also turned toward the celestial arch, clearly curious as to what choice he would make. They knew that this was an important decision, but they wouldn't interfere. Regardless of whether it was to accept the heaven-mending sect or accept Chun Chen's heaven-crushing sect, there were pros and cons to both decisions. Chun Chen faced the paramount heavenly earth god with a calm expression. He didn't do anything and appeared extremely mundane. But in the eyes of all of the mighty figures present, he was like a peerless, unparalleled being. He was facing an ordinary heavenly god, but the celestial Thearcha's power, the celestial Thearcha's heavenly deity of God. At this moment, Enlin and Su Xiaolan had already charged toward the heavenly mountain god. The ancient dragon empress also rushed toward the heavenly metal god and unleashed her heavenly earth god's wrath upon the heavenly metal god. Of the heavenly god. However, he didn't need to use his 9th divine halo. The heavenly gods had already appeared, and even the heavenly earth god had decided to attack. All he had to do was hold off those Tao integration stage super mighty figures. With this in mind, heavenly god Jordan looked up at the celestial arch, Black Spirit Snake, White Spirit Snake, and the others with a hint of confidence in his golden eyes. The celestial arch couldn't take it anymore upon seeing this. What was that expression supposed to mean? Did he think he was some kind of bug? Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake were already charging toward Heavenly God Jordan. Heavenly God Jordan didn't even want to try and kill them. All he wanted was to remain undefeated. He only unleashed 6 divine halos, and he looked quite relaxed and carefree. During this short period of time, the celestial arch thought about many things. He looked at the alluring ball of light beside him, and his extremely profound, heaven-crushing true intent erupted forth, as if it were going to tear open the heavens. I'm the second in command of the heaven-mending sect, so I'm not going to betray my own Tao. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you emerge victorious. I accepted this so that I can better understand the heaven-crushing sect, so that I can defeat them. The celestial arch took a deep breath to calm himself down. He extended a hand. He absorbed the ball of light. Enlightenment, paramount heaven-crushing true intent surged into the celestial thearch's mind like a tidal wave. A paramount voice erupted, as if it were the rumbling of the great Tao. The lifespan of heaven and earth is infinite, but there will always be calamities. The first is the chaotic calamity, the second is the cataclysm, and the third is the realm spirit calamity. The heavenly Tao has an infinite lifespan, but it is not invincible. Anything can become the heavenly Tao and replace it. It could be a cultivator beyond the heavens. It could be a flower in the mountains. It can even be a speck of dust. The celestial arch received an extremely vast amount of information, including his understanding of the heavenly Tao, but most of it was about how to crush the heavens and how to replace them. This was an extreme temptation. If he succeeded, he would ascend to the paramount realm. It had to be said that the celestial arch was very tempted for a split second, and he wanted nothing more than to run over and ask Chun what the final step was. However, his resolute Tao heart allowed him to regain his clarity of mind in a very short time, and he began to carefully reflect on each and every technique related to crushing the heavens. Her Majesty Nuwa didn't stop us from attacking the southern heavenly gate, which means that the heavenly human tribe and the heavenly gods are also a major obstacle to the heaven-mending sect, regardless of whether it's a black cat or a white cat. It's a good cat if it can catch mice. The celestial thearch's aura transformed from an ethereal and unfathomable aura to a paramount emperor that soared into the sky and threatened to shatter the entire heavens. I, the celestial arch, am going to slay a god today. The celestial arch materialized clouds and mist into a sword, and a paramount power descended upon the sword, borrowing the power of the heavens. Bam! His body broke through 100 times the speed of sound as he hurtled toward heavenly god Jordan at an extremely fast speed. Heavenly god Jordan snapped his fingers nonchalantly upon seeing the celestial thearch's attack, and the blue divine halo around his waist created an indestructible barrier in front of him. Whoosh! The cloud mist sword blade descended and smashed into the barrier. The blue barrier, which was imbued with the will of the heavens, began to crack open in the face of the terrifying sword strike, but it still managed to hold on. Heavenly God Jordan was just about to retreat gracefully like he had done in the past. All of a sudden, an extremely terrifying heaven-crushing true intent erupted from the sword strike. Boom! The barrier exploded. Heavenly God Jordan's pupils contracted with incredulity as he looked at the approaching cloud and mist sword strike. He was clearly not expecting the celestial arch to be able to use a heaven-crushing technique, and he was doing it so well. It was too fast. There was no time for him to evade. The sword strike fell like lightning, tearing through Heavenly God Jordan's body and sending a fountain of white blood gushing forth. The celestial thearch's calm expression was imbued with peerless heaven-crushing intent. Borrowing the power of the heavens, heaven-crushing Tao,